All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to my stream today. The new setup, so we might be in for some technical issues today. I'm hoping that it all works. But yeah, I think we're pretty good. Let me know in the chat if you can hear me, see me. Uh, it's definitely been a while. There we go. There's life. Hello. Let me get Twitch going here to make sure I don't miss any messages from Twitch. Here's my channel. Yeah, it's been a hectic month or new background. Yeah, well, a new location. I was actually gonna originally pull up my green screen and show San Jose again when I started, like my old background. But it's actually a little bit awkward the way my desk is set up to get the green screen in here. I can, but I would have been fiddling with it for like 3 minutes, taking it down afterwards. It's just not worth it. No green screen here anymore. This is my actual office. Although to be fair, my previous one was my actual office, just taken from a different angle. But now with my new place, I've actually set up the stuff in a way that um, my Lego collection is behind me, and whatnot. So like you're not just looking at a picture of a closet or something. Uh, hey Ryan, why you look different? It might be because I'm wearing my glasses right now. It's surprising. It's like the bit of the Clark Kent Superman thing. I don't know. No, the one in the middle there. Sorry, yeah, you can't see my Yamaha acoustic off the side. Is a Jackson Soloist, custom shop, U.S. All mahogany. Jackson Soloists tend to be alder body through wood. I got a mahogany one, which is an interesting choice because a lot of people get soloists because they're like shred guitars or like the '80s, like the Scorpions or Randy. Like I guess Randy Rhoads played Flying V, but you know what I mean. Like you get Jacksons because they're like the crazy shred guitars, and that's why most people get alder bodies. I was actually I did lead stuff, but I was actually the rhythm guitar player. I mean, being the guitar player doesn't mean you still can't do harmonized sweep picking, but um, uh, I was actually trying to see if I could get something that sounded a little bit more like an SG. I love. I know it's funny. It makes no sense, right? I mean, Gibson style, different setup, right? Set neck, well, this is through body. I mean, to be fair, um, set neck and through body are probably closer in sound than say like a bolt on, like with a Fender. But yeah, I wanted something a little bit beefier and chunky. I replaced the stock Seymour Duncan's with the blackouts, which is funny. It's kind of like EMGs, but they're a little again more. They're almost like they switched the 85 and the 81. Like it's almost like they switched the pickups around. So like it's a little bit more chunkier on the back end, and it's less like a shred guitar. It's not like Kirk Hammett, like razor bladey kind of from the 80s kind of sound. Anyway, yeah, I guess that answers that question. So we got into guitars pretty quick here. Anyways, I'm gonna put my glasses back on because yeah, my computer screen is actually farther away from me from the chat now, so I'm gonna look at that. All right. He looks different because he's not on a green screen. Yeah, I mean that's fair too. I've always had these earrings. I've had these earrings since I played in my band like years and years ago. I mean, maybe it's a haircut and you're noticing it more or something, but yeah. Oh, that's awesome. I mean, I'm excited for you. I think it. I keep on. I really want one of these solid companies to like really succeed in an open way. I mean, don't get me wrong. Actually, I now have an example that has succeeded. Cursor. is built on Solid. I didn't know that. And the CEO or whatever he or was it CTO, the guy reaches out to me and he's like, "Oh yeah, we've been using Solid for 3 years. We heard about it from our college professor, who's actually a member of the Solid community. And I was just like, seems pretty good. Why not?" It's so funny. He was so nonchalant about it, but um, there's a lot of startups that have been using Solid because they want to, push the technology. They want to be able to get the best performance out of their applications. Unfortunately, not all startups succeed. So like every time there's that list of like companies that use Solid, I like look at it and then people are like, yeah, they don't exist anymore. They don't exist anymore. I'm like, damn. Like I'm glad that people keep on making projects and doing that. And I guess another big success for us has been Lightning TV. Like the UBC, or sorry, NBC and Universal, like the television apps and stuff. Um, but yeah, I love hearing people getting a chance to use Solid. Yeah, yeah. Sorry, yeah. You can geek out on the music stuff for ages. I mean, there's so much like details in the gear. Um, yeah, but yeah, that Jackson in the background is kind of became my baby. It's like it just it's just a beautiful guitar. Um, yeah, ebony fingerboard, pearl inlays, 24 frets. I mean, you need the full 2 octaves. Otherwise, what are you doing? Anyway, locking nut, like it's even got the Allen keys. Like I love how they have the Allen keys actually like hidden behind the headstock. So like if you ever need to loosen it, because like everything's locking on there, so like when you go crazy with the whammy bar, like it doesn't come out of tune. It's just as it's like it's the full '80s shredder guitar, except I chose the body wood of something a little bit more substantial, a little chunkier, right? Like as I said, it's more of like the Gibsons that have the mahogany, like the Les Paul or the like the SG, which is more my favorite, or Les Paul Jr. Those are pretty sweet too. Anyway, hey cousin, how you doing? Oh yeah, the web version of Telegram has a solid version. I make point out usually default wrapped one. I mean, I guess there's a angle too. Like, I mean, use whatever app's the best, but that's cool. Over at Capital One, we use a. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I know that. It's always tricky because Capital One doesn't like they've reached out to me a couple years ago, but like I haven't like it's something don't always talk about openly. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, we've had like short run things that have been really big, like Compass, like election voting software, uh, uh, written in Solid. So like the whole UK election in 2024 had millions of people, coming in and voting in the UK, and that was a Solid powered app. I mean, there's lots of examples of it. Obviously, it's just you know but I mean, that's actually going to like bring us a bit into the topics today because I've got a lot to cover. Actually, I made myself a list so that I don't forget anything. And I think we've covered the first bit, which is talking about my move to Portland and how awesome my guitars on the wall are. Or Lego collection. Actually, I've managed to put most of my Lego back together, as you can see behind me, except for the stuff that's sitting right on the counter behind me on the lower shelf. I have the Deku Tree, Breath of the Wild slash Tears of the King or slash Ocarina of Time, where you can like set it up for either Deku Tree design, and that set got completely demolished in the move, so I have to rebuild it. Anyways, yeah. I had awesome internet. I just is cheap. It's because if I go from OBS directly, I'd be fine. But because I'm using StreamYard, they charge you like double the amount of money to do 1080p over 720. And I actually think, I mean, it's arguable, but people say the Mac built-in MacBook cams are good, and they're decent, but I think you make the bigger notice between 720 and 1080p is when I'm like screen sharing. Like I think like from a camera perspective, you're not actually getting that much. So I always try and keep my text big. But yeah, it was mostly that it was a difference of a few $100 essentially to between 720 and 1080. I have 1 uh, gigabyte internet. So it was just I wanted to see if there's like a noticeable quality difference. And I mean, maybe you guys can tell. I did not tell a noticeable quality difference when I went down to 720. Although afterwards more people came in and they're like, "Why is your stuff 720?" I was like, "Well, I realized I could drop StreamYard and just go to OBS directly. At points in the past, like I was always worried about the ping and or sorry, not. I was worried about the chat and about the being able to get guests on the stream. Like needs solutions. I know Twitch has their like guest star thing or whatever it's called. Theo did offer to give me ping for basically free. So I mean, that's the funniest thing. I probably could just tap into him. He was like, he knows that I'm not techie on this stuff, so he's like, he was like, like if you're happy using StreamYard, just keep on using StreamYard. But I built all these solutions before, so if you need a better streaming solution, we can hit me up, and I could probably get you hooked up with stuff at a reasonable price. But yeah, just an iPhone Pro, yeah. I can't promise that honestly. Um, Making the stream shorter just means less content for you. It's not like I mean, right now we're talking fluff, but it's not like I stuff. We'll talk a bit about that on the videos and stuff, like, um, and talking about the short form versus long form, because I think there's an interesting perspective there. Like, I realize people don't want their time wasted, but in my opinion, people who do stick around for the stream get 10x the value per time than the people who watch the videos. It's way better. I understand that there's some people who don't have that kind of time, but the people who stay are 10x better for it. So, it is what it is. And I don't stream every week anymore. So maybe it'd be better to do like smaller, more stream, but it depends on when I got content or when I don't have content. I'd rather just like get the 5 hours or 6 hours if I have to, though generally not 6 hours. It's a long time ago. Out there, and then like, look, I don't stream for 3 weeks. Well, guess what? Pretend that was 2 hours for each of 3 weeks. Like, how is that not better than like just not getting that content? So Solid's done? What? No, Solid's not done. I don't understand. It's not using exit I can see we're still around. Okay, yeah, I know Samuel. It just come the ones that I like really publicize, like post.news, the Twitter clone. Like that was like a big topic. It was like, wow, someone's building like a Twitter competitor, kind of like Mastodon, Blue Sky. They're not around anymore, but that was all Solid Start. And what was another one? We did a co-article thing with like the guys from StashPad. I mean, I don't know if StashPad is still around, but the people that I was in contact with don't apparently work for StashPad, so I'm gathering something happened to them. So like, I know there's a lot of people still out there using Solid. It's just it's yeah, we need to do better on that side. Yeah, for sure. Then come back, you know, a week later, if you want to. I try and get timestamps. Although recently, I don't have my guys. Jesse Pence was amazing for over a year. Did the timestamps for me. I've been recently, and I got to talk to AJ about this guy, big Redwood guy. He's been on the stream before. He's been using AI to generate LM summaries just so that we can get some like reasonable markers in here. Now, obviously, this is an unusual thing. I usually don't waste time for 15 minutes and get right to the good stuff. But yeah, I mean, yeah, we could talk about the thing that it's always funny when I go on social media is people have no idea that basically the effort with Solid Start and TanStack Start is basically lockstep. Basically, anything that is true about TanStack Start is true about Solid Start. It's just who does it first. Or like earlier, Solid Start was leading the initiative, doing all basic core dev that would lead to TanStack Start. Now TanStack's taking the initiative while we focus on Solid 2.0. But generally, you can assume that those two projects are basically identical. And I don't just mean the solid port of TAN stack start. I mean, like generally we're working on the same core. It's even the same people working on the solid part of TAN stack start as solid start. So it's like um, these things are. I think it's complicated, and I will talk about that a bit later. But I know everyone's at like really wants the latest news on this stuff, but these things take time because we're in an ecosystem that's shifting. The Vite variable, or sorry, the M API, whatever you want to call it, is a huge deal in terms of what we can do with Vite. And I think it has implications way wider than what people are thinking about, or at least people not in the know are thinking about. And maybe that's worth talking about on its own. But I just want to kind of put out there that um, like in a sense, the DaVinci vacation already started when we swapped out the server plugin, service function plugin. It's going to take a bit more because TANstack built some of the pieces very specific to TANstack router, and we need an agnostic solution. But like generally, we're on the same page. It's just funny because I say when I go on Twitter and say something, people are like, "Oh, but I heard this, blah blah," and it's like, yeah, I know, but if I'm not saying it, there's a reason I'm not saying it, not because I'm out of the loop, so to speak. Anyway, yeah, I mean, the thing is, they're further along on the process. Vinci does have some holes. The challenge is that the we need to do more on top of the TANstack start base to get to where we need to be, because the biggest difference between the projects is the goals. And as yourself, someone being practical, just trying to build your application, you probably don't care about those goals as much as I do. But Solid Start's goal is to be a baseline for all Solid projects, not just ones that are TANstack. And I think it means that I need to generalize a little bit further from what Tanner's doing. Obviously, Tanner actually loves general solutions and agnostic solutions, so like he's on board to build the pieces the way that they need to be built. It's just like they have, I think, about 4 or 5 people working on this pretty directly right now. 2 guys related to Solid involved, 3 guys directly on their stuff. Like there's a bunch of people directly working on the 10th start, where Solid Start is kind of in a place where it's just kind of in maintenance, while and kind of fairly stable. While TANstack's actually changing and breaking and doing a bunch of stuff right now. And most Solids focus on Solid 2.0 rather than Start at the moment. Yeah. 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 We'll talk about Nitro towards the end of the stream. If you're still around, 4 hours from now or whatever. Quickset, we use Vite plugins that they don't come into the environment. Yeah. Yeah. And this is where some of the thing is. Like we all had Vite plugins doing this. It's just I think there's a bigger shift in the whole ecosystem that's about to come. And I think that will actually I will talk about it, but it's not what I want to talk about for first. That's all signals I do well from reading. I mean, I didn't get it from there, but that is kind of what made me fall in love with it. Like I got signals from Knockout.js, but having programmed VHDL FPGA before and doing that kind of stuff, I absolutely like clicked with me because that was something like I was really good at. For those who aren't familiar, this is like a hardware language. So you basically programming digital circuits, and you, it's very different than normal imperative programming. Like a lot of people learn like a C-based language or like BASIC or something, which is like do this and this and this and this. VDHL has this idea of like a clock cycle, and everything is synchronous. It doesn't happen one then the other than the other. It's like the next state is the state, and it's hard for people to wrap their head around it. I remember when I was in university doing a project, like we would do lab work, and people like I'd say most people, even people who like acing through the comp sci courses, I remember them getting into this course and being in the lab, and they'd give like 3 hours for the lab, and people would be like take a good like hour and a half or 2 hours to finish it. I was like banging them out in like 35 minutes because like for me my brain was wired that way. Like it was just like uh, there's something about that just clicked. And when I found signals again, I was just like, yeah, it's just the same thing. It's just that it's not where I got them from, but the tie-in is very real. Yeah, I mean, Expo is awesome tool for React. We'll go with the other solids, like kind of whatever works in solids. No, like Expo like is a React thing, so it's not going to to just work. You know, it's same way React Native doesn't just work. But I think it's cool that React's actually created like whole meta frameworks, whole tooling around this to this degree. Just the other ecosystems not as rich, especially in mobile. Like people talk to me about ecosystem stuff, and I'm like, well, as far as the web goes, I think we're in a great place. I think mobile is underdeveloped, obviously, because I mean, mobile is an interesting place. You have custom renderers, so you like someone could build something like React Native, or we've got Tori and we've got Native Script, but like they're agnostic solutions themselves, right? Where React Native is very React, and people will go all in on a thing. Like React Native solutions or something like Exo feels more like Next.js, like where you actually have a specific full stack. Where something like Native Script feels more like the web itself, where it's like there could be 6 different frameworks, right? So having the same kind of consolidation, and because there's multiple of them, you could go Native Script or Tori or whatever, like I mean Capacitor too. I should mention, although that's like more web kind of based, but like there's so many layers of there's not the same kind of consolidation, which is tricky when you have a small thing. So like if say someone like solid core team or something was like this is the way, and I mean at various points we might have felt close to that because we had people working Crab Nebula working with Tori, like people on the Solids DX team or whatever. Then maybe we could consolidate around it. Attila DX team, you might know him from all his conference talks. He actually made Quantum, which is like a Tori solid kind of framework. But again, like just that much smaller of an ecosystem, are you going to have the same kind of push? Expo is much more polished, I think, than anything we have on the mobile side in the solid ecosystem. Yeah, it's confusing, probably. I get the confusion. We weren't sure how these things are going to fall out eventually and where it's going to sit. Tanner named it Start after Solid Start because basically he was so inspired by he wanted to show that these projects were connected, and that the architecture of TanStack Start is based on Solid Start. It's basically the same kind of thing. All the the way we handle isomorphic data fetching and loading, and just all the patterns around it. Like they have a lot more refinement over there because they've worked on things like validators and slightly different syntax, more configurability. But the actual core architecture is what I talked about in my talk, The Shape of Frameworks to Come. I basically said, look, this is how future JavaScript full stack frameworks would work. And Tanner bought in on it. And he so much so he's like, let's call it Start as well. Same thing. And now we have like 2 sort of solid starts. I'm hoping that clears up as we're able to share more parts and we get better ownership of responsibility. But as I said, they're very much focused on getting their main product out, primarily React. I'm focused on Solid 2.0. At a certain point, those efforts will realign again. Oh yeah, links is another one. Sorry, thanks for mentioning links. We haven't looked at links yet, but I mean, as I said, you haven't needed a VDOM to do mobile development for ages. Like 2 years ago, I did that Native Script and Tori videos. But yeah, links is another one. I haven't looked at the links integration at all. As I said, because of our universal renderer, people have been building these solutions without even my knowledge. So there might even be a link solid renderer for all I know, just because anyone can literally pick it up the same way they can with React and just make custom render, like WebGL or whatever. Oh, Links uses RSPec. Yeah, so it's interesting. So like there's all this we still have an interesting tool for factoring, which makes sense. There should be competition, but yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, as I said, I'm not as familiar. Anyways, I've been already talking 25 minutes about just shooting the stuff, which is fine. I like being able to talk shop a little bit, and let's see if I can roll around into some of my actual planned content today. That's good. Yeah, yeah. I actually want to open up by starting a bit talking about the stream, and basically the fact that I've been doing, well, I guess the channel more specifically, I've been doing these live streams, but I've also been putting out videos, right? Let me see here. See, hopefully sharing my screen still works. Not that one, maybe this one. All right, you guys can see my screen, I'm sure. I've All right, I've been asking. Sorry, just side question. I've been asking when solid CSS module support will be improved. Is that a priority? I don't even. Is there a problem with CSS module support? It's not a priority because I didn't know that there was a problem. I figured it should just work, right? Um, it's one of those things that are kind of framework agnostic, isn't it? Currently, Beat subs is CS class name after solid Babel plug and so it's probably. Uh, I mean, interesting. I mean, what's the solution to that? I wonder. I mean, stuff should happen in a different order. I guess is my would be the answer to that because like it's not like we can change the transform to account for something that's not there yet. Hmm. This, yeah. So yeah, I mean, I'm yeah. No, that makes sense. I understand what the issue is. It's just like that has to happen on the like plug in order running side. There's no way the compiler could account for that. I don't think. Hmm. Yeah. Well, good to know. I was not aware of this. Maybe make an issue against the Beat Solid plugin specifically. Like that might be a place to draw attention to it. I had no idea that this was a particular issue. Like it works, right? So people definitely don't complain about it. You're saying it's just not performant as it could be, which I agree. Yeah, that's tricky. Okay. Anyways, um, yeah, as you guys see, I've been doing short form videos the last month, and they've gone to some good responses. But it's kind of opened up my eyes to a different side of things, I think, and I wanted to talk a bit about that today because like you guys, if you remember, like a few weeks back, I was like saying I was having trouble teaching people solid because like I saw a comment on the solid intro video where they're like, "Oh, isn't?" It was like, well, "Why do a whole video about U state? I didn't learn anything about solid." And I'm like, basically they were saying, "Isn't this how React works?" And I'm like, "No, this is like the whole video is trying to show how this is not how React works, but the audience doesn't understand how React works." So um, um, Sorry, I just saw something here and I wanted to talk about this one. Still having to use Babel for solid support is a real issue. I mean, it's an interesting dilemma. It's before Babel, everyone had custom compilers, and I remember this because I was working on the Marco team, and everyone wanted to move towards Babel because that seemed to be what everyone was using in order to like instead of having custom compiler plus Babel, you just do Babel, which is the time period that I walked in. And what's cool is Babel's written in JavaScript, so it literally just works. I've been looking for a replacement in JavaScript ever since, and there really isn't one. The only reason React developers get away from Babel is because things like TypeScript have it built in, but that's kind of like it's like a cheat. You know what I mean? Like it's without writing a compiler in a different language to support, which I mean, we have an SWC plugin, but it's obviously not as capable because we're still working on moving stuff forward. You're in a pretty interesting place because whether it's Babel or some custom, like you're more likely to hit an overlap with someone using Babel than your custom compiler. So I don't know how I feel about this positioning. Like I could argue that like if you wrote your thing in Rust, you'd be in a better thing, but it's like it's it's tricky. I mean, maybe if OXC gives the right kind of plugin interface we could use, and then we can like be like almost like Beat native. in that sense. But I watched a talk from Evan recently, and like that side of things is not on the priority list. So it's like it's tricky. I don't think just going to write our own compiler would be the right way to do it at all. Um, but in the meanwhile, I don't think there's a much better option than Babel if you're going to stay in JavaScript. Like I have people doing updates to the compiler, doing bug fixes, um, you know, in JavaScript, because they know JavaScript. Right? People get on my case because, oh, it's slower than ESBuild, but ESBuild doesn't offer plugins. So it's like you're kind of screwed. Sorry, I just wanted to call that out because I don't think there's actually I don't think that's actually like I don't think there's actually a good option here. So yeah, right. Because they have the React JSX transform built in, right? Not everyone is so fortunate to have these tools build their transform into them. So like it's like your options are basically use Babel or make a custom compiler like Svelte did. And I don't know that like that's a better way to go or not. Yeah, the unplugin ecosystem, like there's a bundler plugin thing, but I need AST parser level stuff. I mean, unless something has changed in the last 6 months, you can't do what I need to do in there, right? Like there's you can't. I use Babel because I literally use the AST parsing level. Yeah, yeah. I mean, if there's something at the OXC level, I think there's that. This is the first solution in a while that I'm kind of excited about, right? Like the thing is, if I'm not able to write in JavaScript, it's still like it's tricky. This whole part of the industry is moving towards performance, um, because Rust and they're all competing each other on build times and stuff. I think that is good ultimately, but it's funny. This sorry for this weird tangent, but this everyone knows I'm like a performance guy, right? And I always like, look, I would never let the end user suffer developers performance consideration. You know what I mean? Like I talk about that thing. Like sometimes making things faster in developers worth it, but you need like 100x win to make it worth it, not like a 10x win or something, right? Every millisecond you lose on the end user, you better be saving the developer, at least, sorry, 1,000 times x. Yeah, it's not 100, it's 1,000. You must be saving the developer at least a full second, right? So like if something saves the developer 10 seconds, or you better not be losing the end user 10 milliseconds, right? Like that's my perspective things. But then when it comes to build tooling on the other side, I don't have the same kind of uh, perspective. I'm like, if it makes us quicker to develop tools to better produce user experience, I will give up developer satisfaction slightly. Like moving everything to Rust and not having people being able to work on it is a bigger thing. See, that doesn't impact your end user. It only impacts the developer. I care about the end user more than the developer, which makes me very different than Evan and Vue and their ecosystem. And sorry to all you guys, because my audience here are developers and they're probably like, oh, but I'm sorry. What I safeguard is the people using your product, not you. So yeah, I mean, it's an interesting perspective. Obviously, if I can get best of both, I will. But I'm that's like where I'm like where my basis is for being critical, which is probably why Solid hasn't been as popular because I'm not trying to, buy you dinner, so to speak. Yeah, I mean, Jared literally the day before Bun was released, like publicly, that day that it shot up to 30 stars, the day before he decided that what's he going to do the day before release? He made a solid transform, just for a few hours. He's like got up that day and he's like, I'm going to release Bun tomorrow, but I feel like just making a solid JSX transform, and he did. But then he realized there's more to it, like SSR and all the other stuff, and he just kind of gave up on it. But that was the effort of Jared in a few hours on the day before the Bun release. Yeah, people can do that, but as I said, since I'm primarily a JavaScript developer, I'm not going to be like people have made the SWC plugin. It's just part of it is also on us. The plugin and design is not as refined as say React. React did something really smart. They were like, look, we only got like the JSX function or create element function, build the whole thing up there. That API surface can't change. Solids rarely does, but slightly changes what outputs come from the compiler as we learn the patterns better. Because this has been there's a like I know this gets on people's cases because they're like, oh, 1.0 and everything. DOM expressions is not 1.0, even though Solid is. It's because we're still learning the best ways to do fine-grained reactivity across the board in terms of compilation. We're getting there to a point that I'm hoping that in the future, and probably quite likely with the Solid 2.0 release, we can say like we have cracked fine-grained rendering to like a place where it's like we know that these are the patterns and this is how everything works. But I did not know that at the time I released Solid and Solid 1.0. And even the last few years, I'm still shifting and learning, especially because there's zones like SSR and stuff where there's different patterns and things you have to consider, especially with like, do you want partial hydration, resumability? There's pieces here that like we still need to get farther in generalizing. And I guess I get it. Not everything has to wait to 1.0. At some point, just put your stamp on it and move forward. But even basic things like spread over the last 3 years have slightly changed in Solid. And I've gone to a point where I've actually taken them as far as I can be without breaking. And so Solid 2.0, I hope to actually finally be like, I think I know how spreads exactly should work or whatever, like, so there's enough movement here that it's been not really the push. My preferred build to roll and bow with him. I'm not gonna lie, like for myself, that's my favorite. That's what I like doing. I have complete control over it. Vite even takes away some of the control from me, but I mean, Vite's wins are too good not to ignore. I'm glad you like my 1000x rule. Yeah. People, the rest have to go. All right. Sorry, back to where I was getting at here. But yeah, I mean, this all started because of conversations on X where I was like, kind of frustrated. Where was it? Yeah, May 15. One of the bigger challenges I had to assume people fine-grained in Meta, isn't that how React works? So we've been getting good responses. I have to admit, this latest video has more views, likes, whatever, than all but like 2 or 3 of my streams. And I get it. Streams are long content. The fact that I have streams that have like 40 or 50,000 views is incredible. Thank you. It's funny. We were just talking about Rust, but thank you, Greg from Leptos. That Rust stream is probably the most viewed stream I have. And maybe it's because we overlapped with some Primeagen viewers for once or something. But like he basically taught Rust to a JavaScript developer and explained how Leptos worked, which worked well with our audience because this is an audience fairly familiar with signals and how all that works. So it was a great stream. But other than that, this content is reaching a different class of people, and it's actually having a good impact, right? It's weird. Don't get me wrong. I'm still perfecting it. It's kind of like a mix between like trying to take almost like topics I like on stream and then giving them a Fireship treatment, which is insane because they're way, way too complicated to be rushed. So you're in this place where it's like, I can't do a 2-minute Fireship video, but I can do a 10-minute Fireship video at the same compression. I don't know if that's good, but it does let me get to a point where I can say my piece. And if people need to learn more, they can go find it. But like it answers the what. rather often than the how or even the why. And that's something very common I've been finding in the ecosystem. I've been watching these videos, Theo does really try and get into the how sometimes, and goes off in the hours, but some of the audience likes it, but a lot of the audience hates him for it. They're like, you make me watch an hour video. And it's like, shut up, moron. Like, I'm sorry. Like, like it's frustrating to watch, um, that those kind of responses to people actually trying to teach someone something valuable. Um, but I wanted to play at the game. I was like, okay, what if I just said the what? Just get the ideas out there so people can repeat them without understanding what they're saying. And and the people who do know have a very concise summary where they're like, look, this is what I was trying to say. This is the cliff notes. And it's done okay, right? People don't have to watch. Thank you. But that's sort of what I've been playing at. And it I did the first video, which is good, which explained all the different frameworks and what their philosophies were and why they appealed. I did the second video, which showed that there's really only three ways frameworks work. Basically, the Angular way, the React way, and the Solid way. Every other framework is basically a copy of that, right? And but with my latest video, things kind of went like a different way, and I want to talk a bit about this. So yeah, I know it's funny. The people watch that video probably not watching the stream right now. So like, there you go. But I want to talk a little bit about the latest Signals video because, okay, I'm not gonna lie. I was planning this video ever since Remix announced the split. I was moving, so I didn't have a chance to like record the video or do all that. But like I knew that when the Remix team split off, that I said in the last stream, like they're in our territory now. It was not going to be long before they were going to come and kind of, pick a bit of a fight. It's not their fault. The second you say you're forking off React and you say you choose Preact, a bunch of people are going to be like, why didn't you choose Solid? I mean, we basically been spending, or or maybe Svelte, but Svelte has a certain thing that's not like React, that like React developers don't necessarily identify with. So we've been kind of establishing ourselves for the last few years that like Solid is the go-to choice if you don't want React and you want to actually benefit from the modern web. Don't get me wrong, Preact is also another option, but in a sense, positioning wise, Solid has basically been saying that Preact is basically like React. It doesn't do enough to get away from things. Solid is what you use. And it's the obvious choice, right? And so I knew that this was going to come. I didn't know how long. I took some time off, and luckily it came right as I was coming back when I back to work. Yeah, I remix now, but like, and they want to fork it too, which is a whole other thing. So it's not even, but yeah, Fresh. But I mean, having a meta framework, and Fresh is a very specific meta framework, right? It's not like your typical thing. But I don't call that. I don't consider that necessarily an indicator very much. But yeah, I definitely saw. Oh, sorry. I just saw a comment here that I want to talk about. I saw this coming. Okay, sorry. Theo repeats himself a lot across videos. As occasional watch is fine, but as somebody who watches them regularly, it's a bit annoying when he explains the same thing 3 times over. You know what? This is the problem with doing streams as the content for your videos. On streams, I cover the same content, from time to time. So in that sense, yes, you are wasting time on my streams. I try and space it out, several months before or even years before I get back to a topic exactly. Or I said like, hey, I cover that stream, but it will happen when you produce videos. you need to give people enough basis so they know what you're talking about. And when you produce deeply technical videos, it's really hard to be like, hey, jump right into this without context. And I do it sometimes on my stream too, where I skip the context. I make that judgment call. But like, this is the hardest part. You don't, not everyone's an expert. With streams, you can maybe assume that people are experts, but with the video, you want anyone who approaches it randomly, first time on your channel, to understand what you're talking about, which makes it very difficult not to go back to the basics quite often. Yeah, I don't know how you solve this. You can basically link them all like a big tree and be like, look, if you have more questions on this, check out this video. And then that video is like, look, if you have more questions on this, check this video. But at a certain point, you need to give enough of a basis. This is one of the hardest things when you actually do try and do deep content. If your content's shallow and it only answers what, then you don't need to worry about this. You know, like a Fireship video usually doesn't care about what you know. It's really hard to build the bridge. Anyways, just something I wanted to kind of point out. Unless you're talking about him explaining the same thing 3 times in the same stream, again, that's also tricky because when you're on a stream type format, you're kind of just going off the top of your head. So it is going to be less compressed. This is why sometimes the videos do benefit from having the script, you know, like, which is what I've been doing in my recent ones. But anyways, sorry, just aside. You can't win in any circumstance, though. If you link out things, people just assume you're trying to get more views across your videos, and you don't say you're too vague. Yeah, exactly. And for those who don't know, Lady Blue Notes is like solid docs. This is a problem actually in documentation and too as well, because and there's so many more dimensions when you're talking about docs, because you're talking about like guides versus reference. You know what I mean? Like it's a very difficult challenge to have data in a singular source of truth and also be applicable in the specific place where someone needs to use it. There's a whole science behind it. She can probably tell us more than I can, but like this is true in any kind of learning materials. Very present in things like docs, but also you know, can be true about, you know, YouTube videos that go a little bit deeper. All right. Anyway, sorry, I love how I kind of get tangented off, but I knew that this remix thing was coming, and essentially I started kind of like when I was away in my head, kind of, you know, thinking like, okay, what kind of video can I do? I was originally going to be like a video about signals, or maybe a video about myths about signals, or, you know, like some kind of thing, or like what React. Like I didn't have the full framing until, well, unfortunately I can't show it because Michael Jackson deleted it. These guys really like deleting posts. But basically, Michael Jackson says signals never scaled, right? That's why I don't like signals. Signals don't scale. And to be fair, they for a few days they were posting a bunch of stuff. And as I said, I think when they said like they didn't like hooks and everyone's like, look at Solid, they're like, I don't like Solid. You know what I mean? Like, it's funny. People were pretty confused. A bunch of people were like, that came to me, they're like, oh, they're having their signals thing. I'm like, no, you don't understand. These guys are React guys through and through. This is not them saying they like signals. Like, this is them saying they don't like anything. And between Michael and what was Ryan, my read on React alternatives is their primary selling point is better performance through alternative dependent tracking approaches. But when I look at the API, they're almost identical. Okay, it's good. I'm glad that this stuff has come up because it actually has provided us with a great learning opportunity. These guys are big voices in the React community, and they're saying stuff that has merit in a sense. Like, it makes sense what they're saying. Not that it is true, but it makes sense why someone would think what they're saying. And which is the perfect setup to be like, look, this is actually what's going on. And I'm like pretty thankful for it, because when guys like this draw attention to what we're doing, it's great for us, right? I mean, to be fair, they were probably getting badgered left, right, and center about like, why not Solid, why not Solid, why not Signals? Like, you know, people's like, oh, Preact got Signals. It's like, yeah, you know, like they were probably just getting like hit left, right, and center. Like, I don't know if they expected that. Like, but when you leave the React umbrella, you are in a different zone. And so, you know, in typical their fashion, they're like, actually, I really like how Ryan handled it this time in the past. He's asking questions. He's putting ideas out there. Now, don't get me wrong. When you do that, and I've done this myself, you're not saying it to be completely agnostic. You're not. You don't. You ask questions in such a way that imply what you're thinking, but do it in a way that what's wonderful about asking questions is you don't come off as a jerk, right? While being able to actually basically say what you're going to say. So Ryan's actually been handling the situation wonderfully, in my perspective. But it's also, I will take that. I don't care what Ryan or Michael Jackson think about this stuff that much. But they have opened the door. You know, now we get to talk about it. So I'm pretty excited about this. Michael and Ryan rants about how hooks are so bad made me check if it's 2008 again. Solid's performance definitely in Solid's main point. It's a nice bonus. I may be biased in Solid's the first framework I actually started using, but React feels very magical. That's so funny. But React team would love that statement. Right. The mental model is all the benefit for me. Yeah. Yeah. Fine grained rendering. Yeah. Yeah. No, these are great comments, right? And what I'm getting at is the funniest thing is he wrote this June 28th. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So yeah. Yeah. This is just as I was getting back. Yeah. I wrote this long thing. It was always way more than about performance. I started Solid because I like the mental model more, right? But the reason that performance has been such a focus is because I had to cut through this whole VDOM versus DOM slow stuff. And the funniest thing is Ryan Florence is kind of partially responsible. The final nail on the React came out and they were like, we're fast enough, right? Like that was a thing. They compared to Angular. They didn't compare it to Knockout. They compared to Angular. And they're like, we're fast enough. And people were like, oh, that's weird. Re-rendering everything can't be optimal, right? It was actually around React Hype 2015 or whatever, like Ryan Florence's DBMon talk where he showed the diffing and he put Ember, Angular, and React Next user, and React just destroyed it in this benchmark. That's when people started going, oh, VDOM is faster. He might not realize it, but in my mind, he is actually right around the catalyst that actually started the thing. So like when I entered a world where I had to prove that the VDOM was not the fastest way. Like performance became a thing because if performance wasn't good enough, like if the solution wasn't better technically, how am I even going to start the conversation to move off the more popular solution? This like if you want to talk, if for us to even get somewhere, the solution has to both be technically better, has to be nicer to use, like it has to check all the boxes across the board to even be considered even an alternative. So that's why this thing started this way, because there's like there's huge misconceptions here. This starts pre-hooks. React adopted this language later. Honestly, for some people on the side of things, that was enough. It's true. I know a bunch of people working on Signals libraries that saw hooks and they're like, yep, my job is done. They just wanted the composition. But that's only one factor. Key difference is React conflates state with UI organization. On the state of change, the declared body or descendants need to rerun if things change. With Signals, it's only the computations that depend on it. It looks similar, but it means that state runs through components than rather are the components. I do believe there's preference here, right? And this is true. I believe that people have different opinions on like what model fits with their mindset more. But there are a lot of people who think the run one is simpler. Especially as just stuff starts scaling up, it makes changes more isolated. You don't get to that point where you're looking somewhere in the tree and you're like, this is rerunning. And it's rerunning because of something above, and I just don't know what thing above is causing it. Like, why am I getting here? Like, there's a sort of funny because this was a complaint against Signals originally, right? Like, oh, updates fly all around and do all this stuff. But at a certain point, granular chains, because they isolate or separate state separation, because the increased complexity of, let's say, the number of props you're sending through components, you do get to an inflection point where the Signals model is actually simpler because you've isolated the pieces better. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, signals solve a very specific type of problem, and it just happens to be that that problem is really good with UI. I mean, I think people have known this almost for 3 decades. I think people were doing this research in the '90s. They were, like, looking at, ways of doing reactive programs for UI. It's just because a lot of UI is just about state synchronization. There's, like, lots of things that could be interacted with and things that tie into things. You need a solution that gives you that guarantee, where, at a point in time, you have things synchronized. That is the benefit of reactivity and signal solutions. Yeah, React was definitely faster than Angular or Ember at the time. The funny thing is, in that benchmark, they were faster than how people implemented Knockout. But if in most things, Knockout was actually way faster than React. Like I shouldn't say most things. That's wrong. Sorry, on updates, Knockout was way faster than React. React was faster at creation. Knockout was faster at updates. But it was like it was a very noticeable difference. Like you clearly chose one or the other. Um, and in my head, when I looked at the Ryan Florence thing, I'm like, people update more than they create. Now, that might not be true if your page is mostly static, but then you got to go like, why are you using React then? Like, I'm just kind of throwing that out there. Like update performance was something that I considered more valuable than creation performance at the time. It wasn't till years later that I realized you could have both. So anyway, I go on and on about like how far you can take this into the future. So, but my point is that generally speaking, I'm glad Ryan's asking these questions because these are common thoughts and provide opportunity to redefine, and look at education in the React ecosystem. So I created the video. For those who haven't checked it out, it it might be worth checking out. I know I don't always side promote my content, but honestly, I feel like I've repeated myself on this content like a billion times. Key moments in this video that I want to talk about before we move on is, um, signals are not the same as they were 15 years ago. Um, Actually, I have to let this ad play. I think. I'm not going to play the video for you guys all, but just my point is that guarantees have gone better. The graph is directed. Um, we don't just like have things ping ponging all over the place. It's been that way since MobX. MobX in 2015 was a game changer, and it was in the React ecosystem of all things, surprisingly. But that's when there are other solutions to that. Like SJS is actually older than MobX. Go figure. But there's been a lot of advances here, which means that the stuff that people are talking about back in the day is not the same. Um, it is kind of interesting though. I have a question because this might be just worth looking in on its own. But how many of you have actually watched? I wonder where I have it in here. Where is it? It was myths, signals, or magic? I'm trying to remember which myth it is. I have a clip in this video, um, from Pete Hunt, and I'm actually curious. How many of you have watched React versus the World by Pete Hunt? It's a talk. I almost want to cover it on the channel because I know that's like more of a Theo thing to do, but it's like it's so it's so good at making the point that I want to make. Let's see here. RX and MobX are easy for bad devs to create a ton of bad code at the time. Yeah, I mean, I don't view MobX the same way I view RxJS. The tricky part is MobX had to work in React's world, so it was never comfortable there. Like it worked. It was actually kind of cool. It kind of turned React into Vue, um, but it never sat quite right, which meant that it was always not where the React team wanted the framework to go. It was always in conflict, which is like I love the fact that, like, if you follow the history and you understand that Redux was like the other big state library that were competing, and obviously Redux won. But it was largely from the blessing of the React team, so much so that the people who created Redux became the React core team. Like, it, when you put it in that perspective, it's actually kind of funny. The problem is MobX never had the right framework for it. Like, MobX never had the um like the actual framework that could leverage its ability. In a sense, Solid was like revisiting that. I mean, there were slightly more performant ways to do the reactivity than MobX at the time, and I did went different ways. But my work into Solid was basically like, what if you started with something like MobX conceptually and just made something made for it rather than trying to jam it into a system that doesn't like it. The Pete Hunt part's at like 1 minute. Oh yeah. History of signals. Yeah, yeah. Thank you. This talk, if like, sorry, yeah, like, yeah, we haven't really got people in the chat kind of participating here, but like, who has watched this talk? He's at a college campus. If a bunch of you have not watched this talk, I think that we should just watch a bit of it on stream, maybe about 20 minutes of it. I know it's a big investment, but honestly, this talk is one of my favorite React talks in retrospect. I'll link it in a minute, but okay. So you haven't. Yes, it doesn't imply, but almost everyone who's moving to signals right now is envious of fine grain rendering. Like, that's why they're doing it. Historically, there's a different reason to have signals. The DX seem better. Like, Vue has used basically signals this whole time for developer experience reasons, not for performance or architectural reasons. They just thought that, like, it was a little bit easier for people to grok. And I think Svelte started that way too. They didn't have signals exactly, but pre their compiler thing, they did have like basically a MobX style get and set API. If you go to Svelte 1 or 2, it's actually kind of crazy when you think about it, that in the last 7 years ish or 8 years, React's gone through one major API change from going from classes to hooks. Vue has gone through, I guess, one major API change. I mean, Vue 1 and Vue 2, I guess, were similar enough, but then they switched from the composition API. Svelte has gone through two major API changes, going from get to compiler and then compiler to runes. And then in that same period of time, Solid is basically at the same API. Now, this is because the convergence happening and people kind of repositioning getting to what it is. But it's something interesting in my mind that we were fortunate enough to be like the framework coming in 2018 that came out just late enough to basically see what the future was. And Solid basically picked its API before hooks came out, so it's not like we copied React here. We did a little bit with the tuples, but generally speaking, like, we came out just the point of time to say, like, this is the future, and the future hasn't changed in the last 8 years on that side. So it's an interesting thing, because it's a fairly safe bet whether you get to fine grained rendering or not, to just go like, this API is what people want to use, regardless of what framework you have. Yeah, I mean, is there use case signals outside web? When you write a buffer instead of a DOM, is there a reason to use signal? Yeah, I mean, if the outside process already has its own synchronization process, I could argue that you don't. The value comes in if you can keep things granular. Like, there is a hierarchical consideration. Signals can always be more granular than the limits of what you can do with a memoization system, because the events are disparate. Like, they can notify things, even nested hierarchically in terms of data dependencies. They can notify things that you have no choice but to run through a certain thing. But that being said, one of the biggest benefits of signals is the fact that they force a clock, like they're synchronous. So if you already have a clock or pole system, you might not gain as much here, especially if that pole system has to redo all the work anyways. Like if you're feeding a signal system into something that's immediate mode, you might not get the benefit. This is why I haven't been sure that mobile we are the right choice. I mean, you can do anything with signals technically because it's just a notification system. So like I can picture a world in which you could like handle the rendering completely differently with signals, you know, on these kind of things. But the DOM being retain mode basically means that in terms of abstraction lineup, it is way better choice than trying to like it will always be closer, lower level, more performant than doing something like React where it's trying to force immediate mode on top of retain mode. Okay. Yes. Yes, yes. And you can go back even further. I mean, I show that in the video really quickly here, where I was talking about the API change for React, because me and my own ads, getting caught up by my own ads here. It's fine, but this is from one of my talks. See, here's Dan Abramoff adding use state to React. But if the next slide here, let's pause on this for a second. I kid you not, this is Knockout um, in 2010 versus hooks into the yes, it's not a tuple. In Knockout, you'd actually call the function with the value. That's how you write, and then you just call the function to read the value. But if you look at the similarities here syntactically, basically Knockout had observables, pure computeds, and computeds. Computeds are effects, pure computeds are memos or what we call computeds now, and observables are signals or state or whatever. The analog here is almost identical. I'd been using this pattern for like almost a decade because I was an early Knockout adopter. And when React hooks came out, they were like, you don't understand. I had one of those like drop your cup, like choke on, moments. When I saw Dan do that, I was just like, what the? And the funniest thing is, to this date, I love pointing this out. Signals libraries or Knockout is not mentioned as a prior art for hooks on the official docs. Still to this day, they basically would not acknowledge that reactive, even MobX, like even things in their ecosystem, they would not acknowledge that reactive systems were prior art to hooks, even though like API wise, people are just like, come on, guys, like yeah. I mean, we'll talk. We'll get into Jotai in a minute. I wanted to actually talk about Jotai today, but let's keep on going on for a bit so that we actually can push this stuff forward a little. What I wanted to say about this video, I said a few key points. I think we should look at that Pete Hunt talk in a minute here. Is that signals? Yeah, React's not the same as it used to be. Signals aren't the same as what they used to be. People do want it for fine grained rendering, as the chat has already pointed out. And we're in just such a different place now that what we consider magic is very different. Like, because I remember signals are magic, first myth. This was the biggest myth early on. I don't hear this as much anymore. But people still, when Solid came out, people were like, oh, it's that compiler. It's like, no, the compiler is literally like React. It's a JSX compiler. It doesn't matter. Everything's runtime. And I think it's funny we've gone full circle where from a place where React is magic, essentially, like, or to a place where almost React is magic, right? Signals are these days probably the simplest solution when you consider stuff like React compiler and that. Signals don't scale. A lot of people commented that they wanted more info about this. This is another great talk. Did I link any of these talks in the actual thing? No, I didn't. Damn it. Jing Chen's talk, rethinking. Let me see if I can pull this up. What is it called? Rethinking best practices at Facebook. Not best. Oh, great. Thank you. The React thinking best practices. It wasn't that one. It was. Let's see if I put her name in. Will I get it? Jing Chen. I'm like literally just not gonna find it here, am I? It's funny. This is just what, like, okay. This book. Sorry, did my mic go? You guys still there? Sorry, something weird happened on the stream. Please, someone write something in chat so I know that you're alive. Okay, cool. All right, yeah, it's so funny because I literally pulled this out as a source the other day, and now it's like not happening. Flux, React. HackerWay, rethinking web app development in Facebook. Found it. Okay. Sorry, everyone. This talk is the talk that eventually sold me on React. I just want to throw it on here. This is another one that people should check out. But there was this like great moment where she's like talking about MVC and being like, "Look, we're 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 basically shown this as our example, but in reality, it's more like this, and then like this, and then what the hell happens here?" Like, and this has kind of been the basis here. I think some amount of people are actually interested in what has changed since this in more detail, or more understand what people are complaining about. If you want to understand the original complaints, I do suggest watching this video. Yeah, I love my face there. Sorry. Yeah, I can't win. Anyway, I do suggest people watching that video. It really puts you in the perspective of like a 2013 2014 developer and why they chose React. People nowadays just in a lot of ways don't get it. Yeah, React just moved this mess into the component tree, right? Yep, and Flux was a real like. The problem was nothing was unidirectional. Like people basically were like, data binding is great. Let's data bind everything. That is not good. Like that's why my knockout apps fell apart. Ultimately, we started enforcing better patterns, and I figured out ways to do things. But like React was legit, like changed the way we approach web dev when it came in. The interesting thing is a lot of it got attributed to the technology when I think it should be attributed to the best practices and the philosophy. That's what people need to get to. You can have those philosophies and things with other technology bases. It was just that React was like so blatantly like, look, you guys are doing it wrong. This is how you do it. And they were right. No, Nitro is going to be at the end when I do this week in JavaScript. Yeah, I mean, it's good. The funniest thing is we had basically already MVVM was like one hop away from components. We'd almost gotten there. In fact, my team had actually gotten there before React came out, but in a different way. The problem with MVVM, let me scala draw this really quick. I'm sorry for people who literally don't care. But the problem with MVVM is you got model and you got view, okay? And let's label them model, view. Now, classically with MVC, you had a controller apparently that was in the middle, but in MVVM, they're like, we got this thing called view model, and this was a good upgrade over controller. The problem with controllers are singletons. They do not contain state. So model has persistent state, nothing ephemeral here. Views are whatever you're going to show, like your template, your JSX, whatever. But you had this piece in the middle originally was controllers. And the problem when it was a controller, sorry, let me explain the problem when it was a controller. I'll make this controller first. The problem with this controller is you would have the model data, and then you had the view, and then you had this problem that it was like, oh, someone selected something in the view. And you're like, crap. It doesn't belong in the model because we don't want to persist it. You might be actually showing this model in two different places in the UI. You might actually be showing this model over here too, in view 2, right? So there might be another view over here, and there might even be another controller, right? So it was completely possible that like you suddenly have this is selected state, and controllers are singletons, they can't control state, and then models don't have persistent state. So where the hell do you put is selected? And the answer to that in Angular was like weird, like $ scope. They had this thing you kind of pass through the controller that would act as sort of context. It was a mess. So what the view model did was like, oh, don't worry, view model owns state. Great. Now you have a place for that is selected. But people started having this like dilemma, right? Because you have two options here. I'm wondering if you guys can see the two options. Option number one is you can wrap your models with view models. So option number one looks a little like this. You wrap your models with view models, and then you can reuse the view model in multiple places, right? A lot of people are like, this is much more dry, don't repeat yourself, because you might write your view model in something like Knockout with a signal. So this would be like your database model. This would be your Knockout. And then this would be like your templates, right? And this way you could only have the same signal once. So when you updated it, it could update both view locations and you're in a great shape. So, and don't get me wrong, this problem still exists today in a sense. But then there was a second type of view model, which was like, what if this has selection? Like the problem is with this model is if this has selection and this doesn't have selection, now you're carrying a selected state here that you don't need. Even if you like make a copy of it and it has its own view model, it has properties that aren't necessary on all views. It starts being an amalgamation. So the other option was, and this is what our company ended up doing, was we got rid of these more closer to the model view models, and we started going, okay, view models should basically be one-to-one with the views that they use. Now, this wasn't intuitive at the time because it wasn't very dry, but we started doing this. And that way, yeah, sure, the same model might have multiple view models. It's not, reusing all the code. You might actually have duplicate code in some places between your view models that work on the same models, but you didn't waste things. You could actually use composition here to be like, oh, this view model has this set of fields that it cares about, and reuse it in these view models and not these view models. I know it's a little bit kind of clunky, but when you start realizing it, when you start looking at this in a different scope, you start realizing that you start realizing that this whole box here very soon later just became component, right? And so like MVVM was like basically just a step away from getting to this point. And if you wonder about what's going on in this model, we haven't been able to completely get away from this from an optimization standpoint. This box up here, let's make it green, is what we call like global state today, right? like this still exists. There's still the desire to use the framework state primitives, in a way that can be reused across components. But like at the time that React came out, React was like, let's just do this and forget this exists, which confused the hell out of people because there really were two use cases. Even though most of the time people were using this where they should be using this, React was like, no, let's force people this way. This is a better practice to push stuff more into components like this. In more cases, it removes all the weird zigzagging and problems. So they were right to force people this way, but this still existed, and React basically ignored this existing through its whole history. But for me, when I look at component architecture, I still see a layer like an MVVM underneath. Does that make sense? Yeah, I'm not surprised. I think people they you get to that point where you realize the best practices, and then you go, oh well, maybe Angular wasn't built with those best practices in mind, but it might not be completely the technology that did it. Yeah. The biggest challenge I have with MVVC, and even to this day, is essentially me- figuring out the right ownership for ephemeral state. And I know it's completely doable because what you can do is you can make like sub models, and you can like release and create models. I mean, I did this kind of stuff. It's kind of like dynamic global state kind of scenarios and contextual, but there's something really cool about the component tree isolation in terms of context API. I made two extreme worlds, but the truth is, in something like, there's the context in the middle which sort of tries to unite these worlds, right? Even to this day, some people will say like you could almost pull all stuff out and just like like React is just a view thing, so it's just say like this part belongs to React. But I think the reality is this can never completely go away, but there is this kind of tension here. That sounds painful. I mean, a component architecture will still have a problem with composable behavior. Forcing behavior tied to components tends to compose multiple behaviors when you need the test or need the nest. Yeah, I mean, it's not perfect, but I think that there is a certain conceptual bit that your model is not completely independent of your view. I think the problem with the React model is it conflates it such to the point that it is the same thing. The component, like this, I have this like little note about own state here, right? The component ends up owning the state, and there's no thing about it. If you can somehow isolate the state change from this unit, then you get the ability to still modularize in a reasonable way, like create state as parts of the UI are visited, but not tie the update cycle to it in such a restrictive way, right? It's like, and that's basically the way I view things these days, right? Like in a signals library, the state is not owned by the component. Like, it's created there, and it's owned in the sense that, like, hierarchically, when you go to this part of the tree, the state now exists where it didn't before, and when you leave that part of the tree, it'll be gone. But it has no indication on what the update behavior of that part is, or what depends on it. It's just saying like, look, we know that in this vague subsection, we will now need the state where we wouldn't need it over here. But it doesn't dictate that like now this part of the UI is forever tied to this, and every piece of it is tied to it. And I think that's an important but subtle distinction. That's why hooks are introduced into its proper composition by now all components close to them. I mean, or you can view it that hooks were the actual last guys to figure this out, and everyone who was using signals was already doing this before them. Except hooks also aren't as good because they have that tied ownership, right? Like they went like halfway. It was basically like there's signal solutions that actually solve this better. Maybe not 100% as people are telling me right now in chat, but then hooks are like a half measure to kind of get React almost there. Okay. Sorry again for a little tangent, but I thought it was important, like the MVVC VC kind of thing. But it just it helped understand that diagram and understand like some of the concerns people had. Like it was real because everything people didn't respect unidirectional flow, and in fact, it was if signals were just effects writing other signals, you basically didn't have a directed graph. Once you have a directed graph, you start getting into a place where like like things flow predictably. Yes, it's signal context instead of components, but in a sense, the way signals run, like their updates, is it's kind of like React runs. Actually, it's very similar with the unidirectional flow, the pure computations, the side effects. It's just more granular than components. So this graph can run through your component graph without being that graph. So I think that's like the key thing. Like those characteristics that made React so good in the first place are actually present in signal solutions, right? Like which is a complete game changer when you understand that it's because like a signal is immutable, right? And then it's derived and then it runs once and in order. And once you have those characteristics, it's yes, it's not as coarse grained as like yes, component rerun, UI redo. It's not as simple from that mentality, but you still can know that it's this and this and this. And I think that's a key piece. Okay. Um, so yeah, I mean, I get why, and I could probably do a video on the whole scaling complaints and stuff. It just people need enough basis to be able to talk about that. What else we got? This is one of my favorite ones. Myth 3 is overlooked so many times. A lot of responses I got to the video were like, "Oh, we can have signals in React," and I'm like, uh, I mean, React hooks and React compiler. This is more updated. I did some benchmarks earlier that they was a bit different. They're basically the most optimal handwritten hooks implementation, the most compiler optimized hooks implementation where you don't hand optimize are basically the same. Like there's like they're trading shots with each other. And then React classes are like the tiniest bit behind them. And then any other state solution you're going to add on is going to slow it down because there's always a way to write React more directly than what a state solution can do to run it, right? There's always going to be a tiny overhead. I'm not saying it would be enjoyable. I would say like writing more performant code with something like Jotai is definitely easier, but it's like it is an overhead over React because React still has to do what React does. You can't beat hand optimized vanilla React the same way you can't beat hand optimized vanilla JS. No one writes it that way because realistically you're going to benefit from it. And I every time I say this, someone's like, "What about Preact?" Well, guess what? What about Preact? Like, like adding signals here in one place. Oh, now that one benchmark got faster, but because everything else, still has a VDOM tie-in, like it actually made the rest of it slower. Like I guess swap rows with hooks and this. I don't know why this is slow. I think there's something up with the class implementation. Why swap rows is slower, but generally speaking, classes with Preact are faster than their hooks implementation and their signals implementation, and it makes a ton of sense why. So like adding something like this is even with a crazy optimization that Preact does where they like actually avoid the VDOM in like one special case. But the problem is like still when you're doing a bunch of other stuff, they can't avoid the VDOM, or if you avoid the VDOM, you take a hit somewhere else. There's like this challenge where you have to still create the signals, and in a re-render model, then you're like, you know what I mean? Like these things play against each other. Vue had to deal with this for years. They finally kind of solved it pre-Vapor by like adding like there's this tension where the reactive system wanted the components to get larger, and the VDOM wanted the components to get smaller. Because the smaller unit of change the VDOM does, the less work it does. And the reactive system, the less boundaries there are, the less overhead there is communicating that reactivity between components, right? In Solid, I worked really hard to remove the boundary of performance on components, but classically, this has been the challenge. So Vue had this weird problem where they wanted the components to be large, And that would help with some benchmarks, but then they wanted them to be small to leverage the VDOM. So what they end up doing is come up with the answer with large components and then special VDOM like memoization, like vmemo like markers on the VDOM itself to say like, hey, don't reuse it. Which is, you might think, oh, that's kind of cheating, but to be fair, Inferno's compiler basically did that. That's what Inferno's been doing all of these years, right? What's fastest VDOM library. But like in a sense, these technologies are at odds with each other. You like adding signals to a VDOM library does not make it better in any way, really. You might have better DX, like the view argument. If you want to actually leverage the benefit, you need to switch, which is a hard message to swallow, which is why a lot of people probably, when they got this part of the video, were like, I'm a React developer, I can't swap to React. Why are you telling me that I can't benefit here? Like it was, and it's like, well, it's something you should be aware of. It's fine. You don't need to use this stuff. You have to understand the philosophy. There's benefits to React's approach, but this is kind of like thing. Compostable is bigger than composable. That's an interesting. Anyway, what was myth for React compiler equivalent to components? I love Hevery Misko Quick had a great article. I still link that in this video. Everyone should check it out. But he basically was pointing out, like, before, sorry, it's this one, before it came out, he was like, the compiler is, because he was annoyed. Do you know why? Every time we talked about signals or talked about what we were going to be doing, React team was like, everyone's like, oh no, but the React compiler is going to come. It's going to solve everything. It's like, he's like, no, the React compiler cannot solve React. It's fundamentally works a certain way. The React compiler will never solve this problem. And basically he's right. And the thing is, this actually undersells how much better signal solutions are, because it doesn't even talk about nested signals. It talks about proxies or stores, where I think people can conceptually get this, right? Where like you have an app and there's some state up here that's shared. It doesn't matter if it's global or whatever, but if you have state up here that's shared and mutation down one path, render in one path, in a React app, when you cause the mutation, everything has to follow from the state down and re-render everything. It has no other choice. You can be smart about it using memoization, where you can go like, oh, this branch doesn't update. But if the change is down here, you still have to get all the way down here to do it, because there's no other linkage. Whereas like, obviously with a signal system, this fact the state up here doesn't really matter, like, because updating the state and then the actual thing is down there. You can just basically sidetrack the whole tree. No amount of memoization will get you this. It's because there's an event under the hood that basically says it's not, this component is updated. Like when you update state in React or Svelte 3, old Svelte or Svelte 4 is all like this too. When you update state somewhere, all it can say is like, hey, my component has an state update. I need to retry and see what happens. Old Svelte was like memoized by default. It was pretty good at this. In fact, the React compiler is a lot like the old Svelte compilers, a little bit more advanced. But generally, signal solution is the only way you're going to cut this out. And it's even more prominent when you consider that instead of having a single state atom, like a whole list where, can have to do that, you can have like nested state structures. You can have things like, like if you had an array with some model in it, like maybe like I hate using to-do as an example, but it has a unique ID and then there's a specific field on it. Because each of those are signals nested in signals or whatever, it's completely possible that you can go into like the specific to-do and change it to completed, and it still do this level update where it's like, oh, completed. It's that one thing that says done that has to change. It doesn't have to recheck the list, doesn't have to recheck the item, doesn't have to recheck the row. It just literally goes, okay, that one thing. And the React render model, even with the most memoization, if it's that thing down there that changes, you have to go and go, okay, well, the list is updated because this one thing changed. The item updated, right? So then we have to look at the row, and then what part of the row? Okay, this thing. It can prune as well as it can, but it still has to go through that process at minimum, which is something that it basically very difficult to do. I mean, it's not impossible because when you use things like external state libraries, you can technically pull your state outside of the owning component, put it out here, and then you could like go, okay, I have my state out here, and then I'm going to connect it to here. But the tricky part is in reality, you might be using pieces of those state. Like it's not just a straight tree down. Like maybe it's branching. Maybe you're using piece of that state over here, piece of that state over there, piece of that state there. Like now this state management solution out here actually has to go, okay, I'm going to use this atom here, use this atom here, use this atom here. And actually, I want to use a specific selector on that atom because I don't want the whole atom change to change. So you're actually kind of like, it's kind of like the difference between using fragments in Relay and trying to wire it yourself. Like basically in the signals version, you just kind of like, okay, create some state like I'm in React, pass it through, and it's done. Like it literally feels as natural. Where when you go to something like Jotai, you're suddenly like, if you really care about where the Jotai atom enters the tree. It's actually important because that now becomes where the state is owned. Like if you bring your atom higher because you don't want to deal with the details and you can just like have the rest re-render, you can, but then that's the start of your tree. It's wherever you use atom, that's where it starts. Like it's better than re-rendering the whole freaking tree, but every single touch point is, because it's still component based, becomes the starting point. Now you can get component granular with this system, but it basically, if you took the same code written naively in React without thinking about it and put it into Solid, it would just work that way without you doing any manipulation. Where in Jotai, you'd actually have to like go through the effort of like making sure that you are importing things as low as possible. Like what happens if you add a child component that now uses a specific field and you don't need it yourself? Well, no, the answer is not just pass the prop down. It's like, okay, now get rid of the use hook here and move the use hook into the child component. Oh, what if someone else is using this over there? Okay, we have to move it also into a different child component too. So now instead of having one component, we now have two components using the use. You know what I mean? Like there's a whole challenges of pulling the state completely out. This is like what I was talking about earlier. It's not so clean when you can overlap it without having the repercussions of that overlapping. Does that make sense? Yeah. So yeah, what I was getting at is the context aspect of it basically could let React kind of do this, but then the nested reactivity part is actually still a problem. Like context, if they solve context in a smart way, they basically can do what I was just saying, where they can like move the tree down from here to like to here. But now you're still talking about where it enters the component, and like, and when you start getting to partials, it gets more complicated. Now, obviously, they've been working on a selector API to do this, and kind of like when people see it in matching, like, cool, this kind of works like signals and all that. But the craziest part is, if you literally just use the signal model, just didn't do this, you could literally just like use context, pass props, do whatever the hell you want to, pull it out of the global state if you want, and it would all just work the same way in the optimal way without any consideration. Like this is all a bunch of hoops to try and fight against the system. Right? Like this, like people ask me often what's the difference between say atoms and signals, and like API wise, they're actually kind of similar. Like some people were, I saw some Reddit post, it was actually kind of funny. It was like, Reddit, why not using signals React something, I can't remember it. Yeah. Or easily found signals. I tried them to be cool. We worked so accurate. Why is the syntax amazing? Will ever popular? Okay, well, maybe it wasn't this one. Someone wrote something. People's signals are more complex. Oh, that's hilarious. No, the funny thing is, I guess they get asked this like weekly. Someone was comparing them to Jotai and Atoms, and I was reading a Reddit post, and I was like, they basically said, "Oh, it's because you have more control with Jotai and blah 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 and implicit and implicit," and I was like, "No, it's nothing to do that. It's just the React render model doesn't work that way, and people don't like it." Like, let's pull up Jotai on the screen for a second, guys. Like, sorry, I spelled it wrong. Jotai. Let's pick it up here. Okay, so we have an atom out here somewhere, and then I want something. Yeah, okay. Filter is not interesting. I want something like a selector of some type. Use get the getter and the setter. I want something that shows derived state, because without derived state, I don't care about this very much. I mean, you will notice use. Basically, the use becomes the point of your app. This is the part that matters. Now, this component is tied for this to this atom, not like where it's actually used, but the whole component is. What am I? Where is it? They call them selectors, right? Select atom. Select atom person. Okay, that's maybe they don't call it selectors. I'm trying to look at what the equivalent of a computed is, because this looks like it just pulls out the specific thing. There's some explicit where you can use like a get method. Store dot get. Basically, the idea was that the tracking in atoms is explicit because the context provides you a get. I'm not finding the right code example here. So, what are attachments? Send me a link. Tell me what attachments are. I've never heard of them. Do, I, but you have atoms dependent on other atoms. Yeah. I like it formed a graph a lot like a signal graph. It just they said something along the lines of like the stuff's explicit, and I was like, yeah. I mean, that's a choice. Like if anyone's ever seen Voby by Fabio, you know, he uses $sign as a wrapper getter. If you actually like look at the code, you import this, and then instead of calling it as a function, you just go $sign the value. I don't the equals false is something else, but generally speaking, he, his shortcutting of writing the code doesn't make it easy to read. Okay, yeah, getting the value of an observable, like basically he has an unwrap function that you can call anywhere, right? But even more so if you want to like make the tracking work in a specific way, non globally, there's another signals library called Metron, by Robbie Speed. It's been helping a bit with some of the efforts recently on the solid 2.0 reactivity thing. And if you look at this API, uh, it's very, I mean, he calls them atoms. It's very Jotai like, where subscribing to change, and then where is it computed? Yeah, he does this. You use get, like explicit get. Now, there's challenges with this because like how do you do templating in a clean way if you have to inject the get context, right? Like it's like you right now solids JSX hides the functions, so there's no place to put the get in. If you had, I guess you could write the functions in yourself and be very explicit, but like one of the nice pieces of the templating is like you can just go like this kind of pass the value mentality, and this kind of gets in the way of it a bit. But my point is, I mean, you could understand why Jotai has its API. If Jotai is explicit like this with gets, then it can't work in the templating. You have to do use at the component level. And honestly, React is not going to reward you for being more fine grained. They're literally going to rerun the component anyways. So it makes sense. So there are, even though technically you have this kind of push pull reactive graph, in practice, atoms end up being very, very different than signals because they still can't like escape the React render model. React, you're kind of trapped into this model, which, as I said, can be fine, can have benefits, whatever. But it is not the same. It is not equivalent, and that's maybe a hard pill for people watching the videos to kind of swallow, right? Right. The last bit about my videos, I just show that we literally have custom renderers, concurrent rendering, all the other stuff. But my point is, I just needed to get this out here because like the stuff that I was hearing from like the React crowd over the years, it's always the same stuff, and it's like it feels so untrue. I had to write a whole article, right? If you guys remember React versus Signals 10 years later, because it's just the same stuff that is just not the case. And as many people as much as a couple 100,000 people have viewed this article over time, and the great conversation I have with Dan Abramoff at the end, most React developers are not going to see this article. I bet you. I wonder if more people will see that video I just did than this article over the course of time. Even though this article probably is one of the most you know powerful statements in terms of what I'm talking about. Uh, let's just drop it in here too for the sake of it. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Adam. Get other. Okay. Yeah. It's inside Adam. Perfect. Thanks, Robbie. I knew you would know. Yeah, I mean, I talk about Signia a lot on the stream actually because they've actually have an interesting solution to diffing. So when I talk about mutable stores and stuff, I've taken a completely different approach to it. The thing is, Signia has a very good way of doing this granular communication, but it's a little clunky to write. And then they kind of, because they know React is their output. Again, I feel that's decided their shape of their API. Like if they weren't using React, they would go a much different way. I think it's beneficial in that they let you make more complicated data structures, but they're still basically. I've been working on primitives that do forking, as in you start with singular source, maybe a couple sources, and you can actually end up with more signals out. And most things in reactivity actually merge. You end up with like multiple sources, and like sure, they're all over the place, and you have different merges happening, but ultimately you end up merging into a single thing. It's like most derivations, are either one to one or multi to one. Like you merge downwards, and Signia is really good at keeping the separation while doing that merging. I've been working on forking, just completely changing the math here, and I think they're interesting approaches. But I think if you know that the final UI can actually benefit from forking, it's a different thing. Like if you're going to go into a VDOM anyways, you're going to re-render a bunch of components anyways. The merging is fine because like literally everything's just going to merge into that single API. But if you have granular updates on the end, there's a big benefit of actually keeping the things separate, actually isolating it through the tree, actually forking, so to speak. Like not all merging has to result in a single everything being tied together. And that's why it's much more interesting to me. But again, these are great solutions in that space, but people are starting from this assumption that everything works like React, and they really shouldn't be. Like that is old thinking. Yeah, in Metron we use abstracting the template. If you need to drive inside the template, you create an inline computed. In the next version, you'll literally do an inline function with the read. Yeah. No, I get what you have to do. It's just, yeah. I do think it's part of the reason, like that, in the way React is, why like Jotai and their Atoms solutions never really touch what we've been doing with signals. It just doesn't money when literally they get no benefit from it. So there is a difference here, and I do want to talk a bit about this explicit implicit kind of thing and some of the challenges there, and maybe a bit later. But let's keep on rolling for now. Before I get to the Pete Hunt talk, still interested people want to look at that, is the funniest thing was after I did all this, I posted my stuff on Reddit, and I know Reddit is notorious for being, but it was the type of responses that you get sometimes that are kind of funny. And I'm going to open up this one, and let's see if I can find the React one. What am I looking for? Signals. Yeah, let's go here. I get less this on my YouTube. This is hilarious. People talking about the covers. For this one, I didn't even use myself. I was trying to get a picture of my React bro, but why someone's asking why you do that. And I'm like, it's science, and it's true. As I said, this will be my best video to date. But anyways, let's go. Yeah. Oh, I love Mark Erickson, creator or maintainer of Redux. He loves how my 10-minute video is shorter content. But no, what was it here? what every React developer should know about signals. But given that every developer, by definition, being a React developer, is stuck with React, what should he do with this knowledge? My answer: broaden their horizons and being able to recognize where React and the future React sits in the wider solution space. Potentially through that, find a better appreciation for the React for what React represents, and be able to identify what challenges and choices the developers behind it make compared to other solutions, and ultimately become a better developer, engineer, and maybe even a better person because of it. Um, yeah, I'm glad that that went over well because it's there basically a bunch of people telling me that React developers have a hard time appreciating it. Hence the downvotes. Because I mean, I don't know where it landed. Oh, I'm at 27 now. When I first posted this video, it stayed at like 0 the whole time. Basically, everyone's downvoting it on this forum. But it was just kind of funny. Okay, cool. Now I know some kind of abstract pattern is used more or less in some JS libraries. I'll go back to using React until I'm upset with it. You got me at the got signal shirt. Petty, I know, but it's a Barber got Clipper shirt. I'm going to go elsewhere. Oh man. Anyways, sorry. There's more, but I want to talk about this seriously. I'm not going to poke. I'm not trying to poke at this author. I wish I could blur it out, but maybe I could. It's too late. I really like Solid Initiative, but I don't feel like I need to know about signals to build a web app. It seems more technical than every React developer needs to know. If the goal is to market Solid to React developer, I think it needs to be more from dumb user standpoint view rather than how it works. All the enthusiasts and technical nerds out there find material on Solid themselves, and this is a great video for them. Great video. I think a bit too complicated for me, but the wrong title, which is fair. It is complicated. So the concern is that like I position this material as stuff that people should know. And is that crazy to think that people should know this kind of stuff? I just wanted to kind of talk about this because I, there, I talk a bit about this on X, but I was like, it goes down to, I realized another poor assumption is that developers want to generally know how their tools work. It seemed obvious to me one would, but I'm noticing confusion and sometimes resentment when teaching things they can't immediately put to use. Like even I saw a bit of this even with my other videos. It's kind of like I know Signals has very little to do with React, but this is also an opportunity to understand how React's render model works. And um, it's interesting, just like this kind of mentality of what I need to get things done versus like my wider general knowledge. I think this is a topic in general, right? I've been live for 2 years ago. I've yet to even be allowed to write a piece. People don't care. They just want to keep using React. Yes. Yes. At the end of the day, isn't every React, Angular, developer just JS developer highly abstracted code? JS frameworks cannot be more than JS language itself. I just don't get it. Yes. I mean, but it's I think it's in one of these responses. Let me see if I can find it. Not that one. Sorry for my ignorance of the topic, but I still want to share my prejudgmental thoughts. Well, I guess it's the definition of non-leaky abstraction that its user doesn't need to understand how it actually works underneath. Sorry, I'm like not picking on this guy. I think this is the most reasonable, well articulated. Like he spent the time to talk to me about this, which I very much appreciate and love here. Is that like a lot of people feel this way. Maybe a better title would have been The Myths About Signals or Signals versus React Rendering Engine. I don't know. It sounds a bit controversial, possibly triggering title. Either way, I value your contribution improving can be significantly smaller. Yeah, like this guy's very polite. But like, are we dealing with non-leaky abstractions? I kind of put this in my comment, but when you're looking at JSX div element, it's still supposed to represent a div and it has events and it has CSS and it has things. Like I don't think our modern framework abstractions are non-leaky. I think we throw something in front of you that kind of looks like something familiar and we kind of get away with it. Like Svelte was the worst for this in a sense where people are like, it's just vanilla JavaScript and the HTML. It's like, hell no, right? But like, you know, like there's that kind of perception that like like these like the abstraction is not non-leaky. Like you can't use this stuff without going to MTN or using the DOM. Like React can try and buff out its docs as much as it possibly can, but like we you should know enough to understand how to compare equivalent solutions maybe, or that like the DOM is retained mode, so and React isn't. So like what does that mean? Like why like it's fundamentally at a little bit at odds each other. So how to like knowing like how it can work kind of a little bit important. You don't have to be able to create the framework yourself. You got to be able to at least be able to like make sense of where it sits, be able to go like, oh, Nuxt is to Next as React is to Vue. You need to like some people don't know that. Like you need to have a level of knowledge, hopefully, to be able to categorize, so you can for later learn the specifics of it or whatever. But at least be able to bucket things. And when we spend all the time talking about what is going on, we lose a lot of the why and especially the how. And I think that is a really you difficult challenge right now because people are like, oh, you should promote Solid without talking about how it works. And it's like, it's funny. React didn't promote itself by not talking about how it worked back in the day. Like you have to be different. If it looks the same and you know you can't mechanically talk about like how it operates, then like what's the point, right? Like, right? But I mean, what is there a problem with the error boundaries in Solid? We actually have an error boundaries component. I think a lot of people obviously don't know the specifics of Solid. Solid is very React aware, which surprises people. Part of it is I'm very JavaScript framework aware. So I spent the time to learn how all the frameworks worked and then kind of looked at how that sits to the point that unfortunately for a lot of people who come in with stuff, it's I have an answer for every question you throw at me, which is not it's kind of annoying. It's kind of like the know-it-all problem. But it's like that's what I spent my time doing and studying. Like the I have never been a Pete Hunt. I can admire him. He came out and he was like, "Look, what we're doing is so much better. You have to understand blah 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 blah." I've never been that confident because I'm a senior developer. My answer for everything is it depends. But I kind of wish at times, and I kind of feel like you almost need that level of forcefulness um, to kind of get through. And I might be going there in the future because at this point, it's kind of getting a lot clearer. It's starting to get a lot clearer, like where these things actually sit. It's all nice that we can all say like everybody's good or whatever, but some technology has definitely progressed in ways that exceed other technologies in certain areas. I say people should try writing confusing. Yeah, writing your own framework is great if you have time. I can't convince everyone to write their own framework. I did because I really told this is the vision of my framework. That's awesome. I did that exercise myself. I think even before you get to there, there's a lot of people in this stream, a lot of people on our Discord who have written their own framework. So Robbie, who's in here, written his own framework, right? Like it's just you don't need that. I think it's very valuable at a certain point in your career to kind of understand it, but you should at least be able to go like bucket A, bucket B. C, like just kind of get into the categorizations. Yeah. Oh, hooks are leaky abstraction, their own rules. Yep. Your know-it-all problem is reason number 3 why I trust all. Well, I mean, you can't just base it on you should question things. You can't base it on the one person, but I'm very much in a position to be able to answer these questions because I had to cut through so much crap to even get to the start. So many people, I mean, you don't appreciate the why of you need a framework until you actually try and build it yourself. And the thing is, if you, I mean, people will get here naturally because at a certain point they'll be like, "Why am I dealing with all this crap?" So you start cutting it out. You start like not using it, and you're like, "Okay, you know what? I don't need Nuxt. I've got Vue. You know, so I'm gonna just plow ahead." And you might get very far. And then at a certain point, you're like, "Okay, I need server rendering. Vue has server rendering. Great. Okay, so now I'm gonna build the thing, and I'm gonna build on a beat." And then you're gonna be like, "Oh shit! Then I need to handle this." And then before long, you're like, you're recreating Nuxt, right? And then you're like, crap, I could have probably just used Nux, right? This always happens, but now you know why, right? I just picked a in your lane example. Shout out to Alex, makes great content, especially around the Vue ecosystem. But this is true in any framework, any kind of level of abstraction. You're going to you're gonna like learn at a certain point. You're gonna hit something you don't like, and you're gonna go around it, and then you're gonna learn why. And sometimes you will come up with something better for your use case. Maybe not the general case. Sometimes you will come up with something better than the general case. It's a good thing to get there at a certain point. When something's not working for you in your specific case, feel free to step out of the bounds. But at a certain point, yeah, you need to know why. I'm not saying every beginner needs to go out and know why, but I'm saying that we should, as a community, embrace the fact that we should be learning. Yes, yeah, they have a rules problem. There's actually one rule: you can lose reactivity. Every version of our rules problem is simply the fact that you have to be aware of the tracking scope. It's all the same problem all the way down. So it's a little simpler, but that's the thing. And I want to be clear on this. I'm not saying that there aren't different trade-offs. I'm saying that people should be aware of the tool that they are using. That is what I am saying. They should be cognizant of the basics of how it works. Solid's whole ecosystem is built on knowing this stuff. It's a reflection of myself in a certain way. I think every ecosystem sometimes is like every framework is a reflection of the situation in which it came into existence, and every ecosystem is somewhat the reflection of its early creators and maintainers. And you guys, I mean, sorry, got me, but this has a big part of thing. It's why Solid is notorious for attracting other framework authors. We're like this breeding pool of like everyone who writes their own framework. They sit in there and Fabio's hilarious sometimes. He'll be in there basically like picking people off and be like, yeah, I don't like how Solid does this. We do it much better in Fabio. Like literally in our Discord, picking people out of to go use this framework. And it's like, I'm okay with that. I will stand by my decisions, and where I've made mistakes, or I say I mean collectively, we Solid, the different parts. I have a big part in that, but like obviously there's many people working in Solid, and put up the test, because like that's where our reputation is. That's where our thing is, and that's why they love getting there, because something challenging comes up, we talk about it, right? If something difficult's coming out, we try and understand it better, right? And that's the kind of community I want. It's not, and it's tricky because it's sometimes not beginner friendly. The truth is, I think the concepts and stuff can be taught in a way that are beginner friendly, but there is a certain undertone here of people who really care about how things work. And I know frameworks and tools get away from that as they grow, because just the number of users aren't all going to be like that. It just is one of those characteristics you find around a community, usually probably because of myself. Oh yeah, Daryl here, another framework writer. Hardest for anything I've done in my career. Yeah. I mean, it's not for everyone, but like, kind of get like just get a bit of a picture of what's going on in your head. Yeah. Props destructuring. Yeah. But if you understand, it's the exact same problem again, right? It's the fact that you are untracking something, reading something at the point of where it's not being tracked. As I said, it's all the exact same problem. Anyway, yeah, okay, let's move on. How far are we in? We about 2 hours into the stream. Okay, I still got some things. How am I doing on my list? I'm about a quarter of the way through my list. Okay, I gotta think about how I'm gonna talk about this then. Should we do some old Pete Hunt talk, or should we move on? Some of these topics are not actually very big. Actually, no, I already covered atoms versus signals. So actually no, I take that back. I'm about a third of the way through my list, closer to half. Yeah, you know what? I think we have time for some Pete Hunt talk. Yeah, let's see if I can get that set up. Bookmarks. I don't need to listen to the whole talk. Sorry, I don't know if I want to comment on this before we go there, but this will be omnipresent. Just think about this image. This is old knockout and stuff. Effectively, under the hood, when you use like a computed, essentially did this. But the funny thing is, you can still do this in React or Solid today. No one should ever freaking do this. But I think naturally people lend to this kind of thing. The state needs to be derived. This is terrible in any framework. But in React developers' heads, they think this is what signals are. But I mean, from this perspective, you guys got signals at home. Signals do not do this unless you literally are using effects the same way. You got basically the same patterns that are dumb in React are dumb with signals. But just look at this, kind of sink in this to kind of get this in, right? Oh, I did have a few more remix quotes in here, juicy ones. Disillusioned with hooks, everything seems unnecessarily complex. It's just funny because I thought they were great. Stockholm Syndrome. What else was fun? React has made enough missteps of years that the space is ripe for disruption. That's the only reason I think keep about going up. People don't love hooks. Suspense asks for quite a bit from React Faithful. Okay, here we go. This is the talk I've been talking about this whole time. I'm gonna pop this into a separate window in a second, but I'll also link it here because I know you guys love it. Okay, let me quickly let's go back to somewhere near the beginning, and let's just give this a roll. I'm impatient enough that I don't know if I'll be able to watch the whole talk. You know me, but let's change how I present the screen. Stop screen. Share specific Chrome tab. And I am going to, I think, overlay myself the bottom corner. Yeah. And let's look at, in my opinion, people always point at some of the other Pete Hunt talks and stuff, but this is the most like in your face he probably was, right? When Aiden's, yeah, I mean, it happens. It's tricky. React team doesn't want you to do that either. It's just people naturally hold on to state. They're like, okay, everything is state. I need it state. And the problem is you would think, the reason this is funny is because hooks force you to think about data flow. Okay, keep that in mind when you watch this video. This is why people are in this zone. At a certain point in this video, you're going to swear that he's actually condemning modern React and not all these other libraries. It's wild. Yeah, same applies to Vue. Yeah, I mean, we all have these derived things. React itself does. React doesn't want you to do that. Right, putting into one object is an easy way of kind of directing it, but like then you lose granularity, perhaps, right? So like don't get me wrong. I think in like a case like that makes sense. You're in a single component, single scope. Like who cares? You're literally going to re-render that component anyways, right? But like wider range of solution consideration. Yeah, let's honestly, this is such an oldie but a goodie. I think we just need to we just need to give this a run. Okay, let's see. Do you guys hear the audio?
Facebook, and then recently he left Facebook and started his own company.
Could you hear that audio at all? Sorry, I know it's a little bit noisy, but could you hear that? Yeah. Okay.
Outbox. And without further ado.
Thanks. How's it going, everybody? Good. Nice. You guys are surprisingly high energy for how late in the day it is. This is great. I always like checking out the stickers on everyone's laptops to get an impression of like what people's backgrounds are. But how many people here have built like an application with JavaScript before? All right, cool. What kind of frameworks you guys use or libraries? Anyone want
to? Keep in mind the time period of this. This is like 2013 or 14 time period. So just
volunteer. Angular, okay.
React.
Sorry? We got Ember over here, Angular over here. Someone yelled React. Backbone, all right.
And D3.
D3, okay.
Meteor.
Meteor? Cool.
Roll.
Raw. Oh, like vanilla JavaScript. The true hipster framework. Okay. Cool, all right. So we got like a lot of experience here, which is good. So my name is Pete. I was at Facebook for a while, doing a bunch of stuff, working on Instagram stuff for a while. Recently started a startup, pretty unrelated to front end, but doing a lot of fraud and spam detection stuff. Well, when I was at Facebook, I built kind of the first big application with React. And then when I was working on it, I realized that there were all these problems with React and it wasn't ready for prime time. So I ended up being on the core team of React for a long time and pushing it through open source and building a bunch of features there. One of the reasons why I was motivated to do that was because I really, really love the web. I think the web is like this great technological marvel that we have, and it kind of defines our generation. So I ended up leading the web team at Instagram while being also on the Facebook JavaScript infrastructure team. This is a team that kind of goes around and figures out the best ways to write write JavaScript at Facebook. And
it's interesting because like he came into the React because it wasn't quite where he wanted to be. Let's hear a little bit more. Sorry, at the beginning I don't have too much to interrupt on, so we're just going to kind of like let the talk flow for a bit. But we'll get there.
We kind of go and sell different techniques to product teams. I was also on the React core team, and I really like the web, especially because it's everywhere.
Yeah, I guess it's a bit later because
any device that you use, you can.
He's not on the core team anymore.
At the same time, I really hate the web, like a lot of things about the web. It's a terrible API for building applications. So the guy who did raw JavaScript, vanilla JavaScript, like you're hardcore, like props, because it's really hard to build applications without help. And even though we have some upcoming standards called web components that make this a little bit easier, it's still like a very, very hard API to use. It wasn't designed for building applications. Another thing that I really hate about the web is DOM manipulation is really slow. You guys know what the DOM is? All right, pretty much everyone's nodding their head. It's the
DOM manipulation is very slow. Slow compared to what? Let's hear what he has to say. But like, this is one of those. This I'm saying. This is just prime. You have to understand. Until people watch this old content, I ate this stuff up. You don't really understand the perspective that maybe I've been coming into from. Let's just keep on going.
In case you didn't nod your head, it's the way that JavaScript application interfaces with HTML and can change the page. And it's really slow. And the slowest part about it is layout. So when you change a part of the page and you have to change the way that text wraps around something, that's really slow. And understanding when it's going to trigger a fast.
I know you think differently, Daryl, but I think the web component comment is the only comment that has aged incredibly well. But
layout change or slow layout change is pretty difficult to understand without a lot of experience with the like kind of web inspector and all those tools. And the Google Chrome team in particular is doing a great job building tools to make this easier, but it's still really hard to understand. Another reason why I hate the web is the standards process is really slow. But this is actually by design, so it's kind of a good thing. The reason why the web is everywhere is because it is standardized, and that means that all the implementers implement the same thing. So we can deploy an application once and have it run anywhere. but it also means we don't get a lot of features, and the features that we do have are designed by committee, and they tend to be slow. But at the end of the day, the biggest problem is that we're building the web is designed for documents, and we want to build applications. So Facebook needed a solution to this problem. We were sick of building applications that looked like documents, and we wanted to build applications that performed like applications and felt like apps. So does anyone here know, like, can someone tell me what an application is on the web? Like, what does it do? No? Okay. Are you guys CS students? I don't know. All right. So the way I think of an application does basically three things. It listens for user events from the browser, so it gets clicks, keystrokes, mouse movements, touch events. It handles network events, so a request coming in from the server via either an XML HTTP request or WebSocket, and it also issues network requests as well. And it manipulates the DOM. That's pretty much all it does. Basically, it responds to events and puts pixels on the screen and sends stuff to the network. It's actually like a pretty difficult thing to do once you start to write an application. And I think that Dijkstra had a lot of really great advice for us kind of back in the 60s and 70s about how to write great applications. And he says, we should do our utmost to shorten the conceptual gap between the static program and the dynamic process to make the correspondence between the program and the process as trivial as possible.
Makes sense.
What the hell does that even mean? I'll tell you what it means. This is a buddy list on Facebook.com on the desktop site. Now, I'm going to read to you a series of network events coming in from the server, and then I'm going to ask you what this looks like at the end. You guys ready? Alice went offline, Bob went offline, Steve went online, Bob went online, Charles is idle, and Charles is on mobile. All right, what does it look like? These processes that evolve over time are really hard to understand. Like, holding all that state in your head is crazy.
Yeah, so he's talking about declarative versus imperative, which is very important key point here. Is why we use web frameworks. Like the starting point here is this change of making things be state or data driven instead of process driven, right? It's not about events necessarily. And I didn't dig into this earlier. I mean, I can possibly pop over to another tab and talk about it a bit later, but there's this kind of chat going on about this week about like RX versus signals and like things. What he gave you was a series of events, and sometimes with events are good because then on each thing that changes you can do something. But for displaying or synchronizing UI, events are actually a harder way of like visualizing what's going on. Like events flow into the system all over the place. What you ultimately want is that perfect reconciled system, right?
It would be a lot easier if I could ask you what that looks like by just looking at this JSON data structure. By looking at this, you could probably draw a picture of the buddy list pretty easily. That's because this is a static snapshot in time of what the buddy list should look like. It's not a series of events, mutating state that changes over time. It feels me? All right. So have you guys heard of this thing called data binding? The Angular people probably have, Backbone people maybe as well. It basically takes the user interface, which is this dynamic process that changes over time, and it tries to make it look more like a static program. So you take a snapshot of your data, and some system somewhere syncs up your user interface with that data. And so I like to think of data binding as a polyfill for reactive JavaScript and the DOM. Now, for those of you not familiar with what a polyfill is, it's a JavaScript library that kind of makes a feature that's available in the next version of JavaScript or the DOM available today. It's like a shim. And what data binding is it's basically a way of saying like, hey, I wish that the DOM could automatically update itself based on variables in JavaScript. Let's make it work.
There are people still trying to make this go through the proposal. I'm actually going to, if it starts with getting templating into the language, I'm going to talk a bit about, if I have time later, about Justin's latest work, the guy from Lit, in terms of template standardization. But it is important to kind of point out here that with the signals proposal, all the framework guys are like, let's hold back and like be careful. There's a bunch of people salivating over the potential of just passing signals directly into DOM and having it directly update. And I think this talk actually gives some good backing of why that might be not great. But yeah, let's continue. Or that maybe there isn't a single standard way of doing it.
Now, the problem is that these data binding abstractions that we have are leaky abstractions. And they're really, really not simple. So Facebook had a traditional kind of data binding approach a couple of years ago. It was called Bolt. It's actually still on GitHub, I think. And it ended up getting very, very complicated very quickly.
Sorry, just a side note I'm noticing, Jack. Syntax is not the most terse. Yeah, I agree. That being said, Svelte syntax used to, I would agree 100% with you with Svelte 3 and 4. It is way lighter. Svelte with ruins, we're talking about the difference between destructuring a tuple and like using a single variable that writes. Like the syntax difference mostly matters. I guess the setters are still more thing. Yeah, the syntax plays like from an ideological, like from an idea standpoint of like, these are pieces of my language. Like I need to write here, I need to read here, we need to update there. Syntactually, it's slightly longer, but like in terms of like number of concepts and locations, it's basically identical, right? Like Solid's syntax is slightly more verbose because we believe in read-write segregation and enforcing more control mechanisms mostly. But like when people put code between, say, Solid and Svelte side by side, Solid's version will be like the line will be slightly longer because it has a couple more characters, but there won't be more lines of code, is the best way I can put it. Yeah, and there's things that do way better than Svelte. I don't think it's an important metric at all. I think conceptual metrics and I think mechanical things. If people want to get over code turgensis, yeah, they should all use Marco. It blows even Svelte out of the water. Yeah. Sorry. Just before I continue, get you guys salivating. Ryan Turnquist, Solid router creator, joined Marco team as I left the Marco team. He reached out and wanted to talk about doing a stream coming up about Marco 6, which I think, if you guys know, given my policy on Marco 6, means I think we're getting pretty close because I'm not allowed to talk about. I said I swore that I would stop talking about Marco and Marco 6 and how incredible it is until it actually came out. I think we're getting very, very close. So get excited. Why is Marco not more popular? People always ask me this. It wasn't marketed. It's in a weird place. It's just funny when it's like, it's my poster child of someone of technology that's just so far ahead of its time and so much in some ways better than all the equivalent things at what it does, that it just kind of blew past where people are. Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, Ryan stream is the best. For some Marco 6 news. It only counts when I bring it up. Yeah, I had this problem of gushing about Marco basically anytime I'd be like saying something and I'm like, oh, of course Marco does this, you know. Yeah. Anyway. Okay. He says contemporary data binding here because he's talking about that at the time, but let's continue on. Sorry. I got sidetracked. More destruct.
And the thing that made it difficult was that we would build an application and it would work. And then we would play with it for a while. We would get these bug reports that come back in that say, hey, the user interface is broken, or this button doesn't do what it's supposed to do. And we couldn't reproduce that bug report. So the most important thing that we realized is that we want to just have reproducible bugs. Like, we don't even care if the thing's easy to make or if it works, but as long as it breaks consistently, like, we'll take that. That's a win. So Dijkstra, again, says simplicity is prerequisite for reliability. Reliable systems are predictable. So how do we...
I want to stop on that. Breaks predictably is a win. That is a huge point here that probably gets washed over a bit, right? Because there's a different aspect of it here, which I talk about with signals and Solid per se. But like, in my opinion, if something like the thing that goes wrong with Solid the most is you lose reactivity. Something isn't reactive. Someone destructured a prop, someone did it, and then it just breaks. And basically, like, it will usually break at the point that someone makes the change. It might not be where they expect that change to impact, but they will break it immediately. It will not be hidden. It will be broken from that point on, immediately broken. You did something wrong. It broke. Hopefully, a little debugging, you will find it. What happens in the React model these days is it might render properly, but when you do the equivalently bad thing, it will re-render like 4 or 16 times. Like your performance will go out the window. I remember someone, I think it was my favorite someone, Jay Larkey, mentioning that he was porting some code to Solid and had an infinite loop, and it was like the one time he hit an infinite loop in Solid, and then he was like, "Oh, this weird signal Solid doing an infinite loop," when reacting, and then he looked and he's like, "Oh crap!" The React code that he copied it from already had the infinite loop buried in. He just hadn't noticed it, and obviously, I think any framework that does an infinite loop will do an infinite loop, and it'll die out, and it won't it will term stack or whatever. Like you'll be done. But like generally speaking, I think it's interesting when he's talking about his guideline for reliability is that it breaks early, and in Solid, our kind of guideline for performance is that it breaks early. Basically, working Solid code is performance Solid code, generally speaking. So there's parallels here. Yeah, true story. Yeah. You guys seriously arguing about Svelte syntax? Sorry, it's just so the class thing or whatever. I mean, Svelte has its reasons for doing what it did. I think I already talked about this on a stream, about like their choices. Obviously, anyone involved in Solid disagrees with Svelte's choices. So I don't think any you guys are going to hit any kind of thing. I do not prefer Svelte syntax. In fact, it's funny. Svelte 3, Svelte 4, when someone said it was more terse or whatever, and I would agree with them. I had nothing to argue against. I'm like, yeah, it is definitely more terse. It's more straightforward to get through to. When they added runes, they added signals and deliberately chose to do things in a different way, which is perfectly fine for them. But obviously, we had the choice of going that way. In fact, we have plugins that do similar before Svelte runes even existed, where people did it because they liked it. So yeah, it's funny because I don't think you guys aren't going to agree on this. We fundamentally, just because philosophy behind Solid, all these other kind of pieces and understanding, Solid's decision is very rooted in mechanics. So you guys are going to basically talk past each other. I just know. Like in fact, Vue had a similar debate, and I mean, this is not like Coupe, but Vue sided with us. But you know what I mean? Like there are reasons to not go the way that Svelte did. Svelte chose to go that way, which is good. It makes a unique solution and people like it. But you guys are not going to agree about it in the course of this chat, I am pretty sure. And they're still going. All right, it's fine. Let's keep on going.
Make a system simple. Now, simple is one of these words that gets thrown around all the time. And you ask 2 different JavaScript library authors, like which one is simpler, they'll always say theirs is simpler. Even though, everyone has a different idea of what simple means. But does anybody here know who Rich Hickey is? Has anybody heard of the Clojure programming language? Okay, so Rich Hickey is this guy with this huge afro, and he invented the Clojure programming language. He's super smart. And he has this great talk that I suggest everybody goes and watches called Simple Made Easy. And at the end of the day, he comes down and he says, what matters for simplicity is that there's no interleaving. So Rich makes a distinction between what is simple and what is easy. So easy is something that's relative. What's easy for you might not be easy for me, or what's easy for me might not be easy for somebody else. It's all dependent on what our experience is. Some people find like C programming really, really simple and building user interfaces in JavaScript really difficult. And sometimes it's vice versa too. Some people, it just matters what your experience is. But simplicity, we can make that actually an objective thing. And we can say, hey, when you're looking at a single piece of code, how many different concerns are interleaved in there? How many things do you have to load into your brain to understand what that piece of code is doing? So it's important to understand that simple is not equal to familiar. And so just because you have experience with a piece of technology or the status quo says you should do something, doesn't mean it's simple. It means it's familiar, and it might mean it's easy to you, but it doesn't mean it's simple. So we're talking a lot about data binding, and there's a couple of approaches that you can take to implement data binding. The first one I'm going to talk about is key value observation.
They used to call signals KVO, or the equivalent of it. It was funny that the key value observation is what they call it, because a lot of them used objects, kind of like Vue's options API. Ember is notorious for this. Knockout, funnily, is the only one that had the discrete signals. I guess Meteor kind of had discrete signals too. Let's see.
Observation. Because in order to understand why we actually built React and did something different, you need to understand what the status quo was, because you really shouldn't invent something new unless you have something new to add to the conversation and the body of knowledge. So key value observation powers libraries like Ember, Knockout, Backbone, Meteor. If you've ever done any iOS development, there's key value observation in iOS as well. And it's built around the ideas of observables and computed properties.
If there's KVO in iOS, does that mean that the iOS model is retained mode, not immediate mode? I'm just curious. I don't actually know this, but if mobile models are retained versus immediate, that suggests that Solid has and Signals have a place on mobile more than React does. Just hypothetically speaking.
These are the fundamental building blocks of a key value observation system. So let's imagine, for example, for this lecture, that we're building.
Okay, this is a good point. I was tempted to do this, but people watch me, I imagine, at 1.5 speed. So if I make his talk 1.5 and then someone else puts 1.5 on top of it, they're going to hit a problem. So I'm not going to 1.5 speed it just because yeah. Although a lot of people say they slow me down, but okay. What? Fine. I'll meet you in the middle. We will slightly speed him up. We will give him a 1.25.
A list of top companies by the percentage of votes that are upvotes. So we have a data structure sitting around somewhere like this, where we have a list of companies, and each one has a title, number of upvotes, number of downvotes. And I'm an amazing designer, so I rendered a UI that looks something like this. If we were to build that with Ember, we would construct a template that looks like this. And what this says is it creates an unordered list with a UL tag. And it says for each of the top companies in that data structure, render the title, and then next to it, render the score with a percentage.
Okay.
Now remember, we didn't actually have a score item in that data structure. All we have are the upvotes and the downvotes and the title. So we have to compute that score as a percentage.
Okay.
So let's walk through how we would build the JavaScript portion of this application with an eye towards how this abstraction leaks. So first we make a function that computes the total votes given a company. Now I'm going to use Ember for this example because it's a very, very popular implementation of KVO. And those teams have spent a long time trying to make this as predictable and easy to understand as possible. So the observable properties that we have here are called upvotes and downvotes, and you call company.get to get the current value of them. So get the current value of upvotes and downvotes, and we add them. And our company object has a computed property on here, which is indicated by that dot property called score. And it takes the number of upvotes, multiplies it by 100, divides it by the total number of votes, and it converts it to a percentage. Now, one thing to keep in mind with computed properties is that dot property syntax says, hey, whenever the upvotes or the downvotes change, make sure that the score is recomputed. You guys following what's going on in this code? Okay, cool.
Right. And while we go through this example, picture how you'd write this code today in React.
So similarly, in the app model, whenever the list of companies changes, we want to change the list of top companies. And the reason for that is we're resorting this list. So top companies is a sorted list by the total number of votes. So it's the most popular company. And then finally, we instantiate it with a little bit of boilerplate down here, which is mostly made up, but you get the point. So if we were to run this today, I actually built a little test app that randomly changes the number of upvotes and downvotes by ±5 as the application goes on to simulate live updating data. And so when you're running that application, it looks like this. Yeah. So you see the numbers are automatically updating, right? I'm tweaking the data model and the DOM is updating. I'll replay it again if you didn't see it. It's very exciting. This looks good, right? You guys good with this? All right. So you guys just approved my diff, and we're going to ship this to production. That's what happens in industry.
It's not resorting the list. The one that's low, the second item is lower than the third item.
Interesting observation. So I've used this example in like 3 or 4 conferences, and nobody has caught that. So the point of that, all right, A right there. The point of this is that like everybody else in this room didn't see that. So it's actually pretty difficult, or it's very easy for this bug to slip by, right? So where is that bug in this code? Now you're really on. So the problem is the sorting was wrong, right? So it's probably in this top companies thing where we sort by the total number of votes, right? What? Oh, yeah, go.
I think it's taking the top 3, but not sorting them by the number of votes they have.
Well, we're calling the sort method in JavaScript, and let's assume that the sort method actually works correctly. Like that's not the problem, but that's a good job. Yeah.
Do you guys see what the problem is? I haven't watched this talk in a while, but my guess here is that this depends on companies, but doesn't depend on upvotes and downvotes. Because no, actually, this is actually interesting. Actually, yeah, it's because they explicitly listen to companies, but don't explicitly listen to they're calling total votes, which called the get votes and get down votes, but they're not actually creating a dependency here because they're only listening. The way Ember works is it's all the tracking dependencies are explicit, right? Let's see what he sees. Yeah, this is basically the dependency array is missing these values, so to speak.
The property isn't for upvotes and downvotes in top companies, so the upvotes and downvotes change the sorting memory run.
Exactly. So what he meant is, right now we're saying, hey, when the list of companies changes, re-render the top companies list, right? It's not looking at the individual items within the list. So when you mutate an individual company within that,
Svelte switches signals to solve this problem. You're actually right. Svelte tracking could only track within the scope of the function it was in. Svelte 3 or 4 would actually have broken exactly the same way, funnily enough. Interestingly, Knockout would have not been broken by this example because because it has automatic tracking, because you don't explicitly put the thing in. This is actually like, this is caused in a sense by 2 things. Dependency arrays and the fact that this is kind of dynamic. Like you can't put all of these in the dependency array, specifically, and these are separate atoms, so to speak, right? In React, because the expectation is immutability and you redo everything anyways, it doesn't matter. You wouldn't listen to this in a granular way. If you update, because it's immutable data, if you update upvotes or downvotes, that updates the company, which updates companies, right? You have to clone all the way up the tree, so it doesn't have this problem. So Pete's saying reads should track, right? He's saying you should use signals, right? No, he's not. Let's keep him going. No, but I mean, Knockout, you would make, if these are separate signals, you would make an observable array, and then each of these objects would have a observable on it. And then when you went through this process of reading it, this computed would actually get all the properties, and this would just work. Yeah, I don't remember my Ember, but yeah, I mean, it's because of explicit tracking that this breaks, which is hilarious when you consider React hooks. Let's keep on going.
and you change the number of votes, you need to observe that and tell top companies to update. So the way you do that is with this glorious syntax. This is like a thing that Ember made up. Okay, actually, I think they might have borrowed it from Apple, but like somebody made this up who was not like a long dead computer scientist. And I like using stuff that long dead computer scientists have made, or people who have invented a language in like 10 days, like JavaScript. What's the point I'm trying to make here is not that this is a tricky API, it's that it's not simple, right? We're thinking about our business logic here. We just want to sort the damn list. But with this, I have to load the part into my brain that's like, how are we tracking changes throughout this? So not just thinking about how my application works, I'm thinking about how do I tell the framework to track changes in this data structure?
Is this not what React hooks introduced? You guys get what I'm saying, right? Yeah, I mean, what Pete's saying is that use immutable data and re-render stuff when stuff changes. That's what he's saying. It's a simple model. You don't have to worry about where the data is flowing in your app. You literally can just blow it out. It removes these bugs because you're not going, oh, I missed tracking this thing. And to be fair, when a lot of people think of signals and stuff, they're worried about this kind of tracking thing. But like the places where you introduce the risk of not tracking generally are the places where you give people the ability to explicitly track or untrack. This is why I never initially liked the watch API from Vue. I preferred untrack. Don't get me wrong, untrack is like absolute too, and it does the same thing. But sometimes people have a false sense of confidence when they think that they're tracking exactly what they need to track. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's a subtle thing, but like, and technically we have an on helper that does this as well, and blah blah blah. I mean, you end up in this zone, but it's and if we do split effects, we'll do it. But again, that's leaving the system. I think that like a different case or argument can be made there. But generally speaking, these aren't effects. This is derived data. This is use memo, as Dev was pointing out. And essentially explicit dependencies as a necessary for things to work is a source of bugs that in a sense React didn't care about because it's immutable and re-rendering, but React hooks said you should care about it. So yeah, I mean, we're actually meaning doctrine, but he doesn't know how to do it, so his only solution is to track everything or rerun everything. Yeah, right. Yeah, like in modern side, this is very, very interesting. Yes, and this was kind of the conclusion I came with Knockout. I did go to implicit dependencies for effects in Solid because rendering was effect, but in hindsight, I think that like that was back in 2000, like before I created Solid, back when my Knockout days, this was the conclusion I had reached as well. Right? You might be selective on how you want things to leave your system, but inside the graph, you shouldn't be playing this game. Yes, and it's true with your explicit tracking because you don't have this problem because your track is your read. The key part is the separating the description of the track from the read. This is the problem. If your track is a read, you don't have this problem. I showed it a bit on stream. It's a kind of Atom signals library and framework, I believe, that Robbie has created. I might have the link earlier in the chat. Yeah, and these are all really legit arguments against stuff. But ironically, I don't think signals today have this problem. And in a lot of ways, React has this problem today. Not as bad as this, but React hooks introduce this problem. So let's continue.
That's interleaving. That's another thing to put in my brain. So once we make that change, they're resorting all the time, just as they should. Now, we fixed the bug, which is great, but we just solved the problem. We shouldn't have had that problem in the first place. This section, yeah. You guys gonna ask a lot of questions later?
See, now he's talking about Knockout.
Take it as a no? Okay, so we'll go through this section. All right, I'll just blow through this other example really quickly. Here's another problem with KVO. So this fixes some of the problems of the previous type of KVO. This is a system called Knockout. And imagine we're building a stock trading app or a stock purchasing app where the share price is changing all the time and we want to order a certain number of shares and we see the cost changing. Okay, and we want to purchase stock. We use another domain-specific language. Rather than handlebars in our previous example, we use HTML attributes to annotate our DOM for Knockout. what this says is basically, okay, I want to bind the text of the span to this format currency function, whatever that current value is.
Oh god, can you picture using a template language like this? You guys have no idea how good you have it now. Anyway.
This input binds the value of the input to the share. So whenever somebody types into the text box, the variable shares gets updated. And then we update the total cost by computing the cost. We bind the value of the total cost span to whatever this format currency cost thing does. Okay. This makes sense?
Yeah, the only thing to point out is this value is two-way binding. It's a data bind. It's not completely implicit, but it kind of comes in the territory when your signals have the read and write baked into them. People can build APIs like this. Oh god, yeah. Alpine and Datastar, yeah. HTMX. Oh man. Yeah, if some people are gluttons for punishment, I guess. Let's keep on going.
Okay. So we have format currency function. Basically just slices off all but the last two digits or digits of precision.
The attributes are as declarative as you can get, but I don't know. I think semantically, simple stuff like setting like specific attributes. First of all, the syntax is very verbose, like because you're not just like setting the attribute you're going to set. You're like data bind this attribute name is this. Like it's very very verbose. But like more so, if you want to talk generally about it, attribute semantics are basically like setting description on the language. When you start putting like control flow in like that, and you start doing that, like you're actually warping the semantics. And it is I agree with Pete that it's a very special DSL like thing. I will say that React's biggest only place, they only have two things that I feel like breaks the language specific barrier, and why kind of like with JSX, key prop and ref. These are two things that are kind of messing with the semantics. But when you start doing stuff like your control flow as data bind attributes and stuff that impact descendants and like on elements that like and or using it to inject like a new context, like we're yes, you can technically use attributes for that, but we are very much warping the purpose of attributes. Yeah, I mean, if you mean from the perspective of using data as a way of distinguishing. See, the reason they did this was because back then you didn't want to collide with the DOM space, like namespace. So you put data in front, so you could say that hey, this is not going to collide with any existing attribute or property or whatever. I think something that people don't realize, and React's probably somewhat responsible for this kind of mixture or change of mindset and stuff, because they kind of like try to abstract completely off it, is a lot of web frameworks actually really tried to follow web standards. So they really did try to follow the rules and be good players in the zone and do the right by it, and try and adopt web components and make their APIs resemble web components, so in the future they could like erase that part of the thing. So, that was also this time period, if you want to understand, like people were really trying to work with the platform other than React, and React kind of showed everyone was, and the way the web platform actually ended up developing was that betting on the web platform was the wrong thing to do, right? Like it will get there eventually, but it maybe, but like especially you can see today, the way web components have turned out, like as definite proof of this. Like, generally speaking, it doesn't got your back. You know what I mean? Like it does at the lowest sense, but you have to walk through so much more stuff. It's not solving the problems for you. As he said, they're focused more on documents apps. I think that I've talked to the Chrome team. Like the Chrome team, these guys have moved past that, especially in the last decade. But like, especially at this time period, and obviously because the web stuff moves so slowly, like basically the decisions being made in 2010, 2011, 12, 13, 14, 15, we didn't really get them, because of how slow things move, until 2020. The stuff that's been going on since 2015, probably much better place, but you don't get that till 2025. Do you know what I mean? So like, I think kind of like understanding that puts this a lot into perspective, because like they were really trying to follow the web standards. Honestly, closest to standards, it's got to be probably like something like Lit, like one of the web component frameworks. I any I mean, but the problem is they're also shaping it. Like Justin built the templating for Lit and then came back and was like, look, this is what, like, he was like, this is what we should build in the browser. And they almost went that way. And then some people were like, hey, hold it. And in the meanwhile, we actually showed that like fine grained rendering was more performant than what they were doing in Lit. And like, we don't want to be stuck here forever, perhaps. But like, it's kind of almost like a manifest destiny in that sense. Like the framework closest to the web standards is the one trying to build the standards. So like, all the other modern frameworks are not. I mean, when people talk about like Svelte versus Vue versus Solid versus all this stuff, I don't feel like they're all, in that sense, the kind of the same level of things. They literally use JavaScript and they use features of the platform that make sense for them, that they can leverage the best ability. And if stuff doesn't work well for them, they just don't use it. It's not using standards for the sake of using standards. It's using standards when they're beneficial. You know, I came across a crazy article the other day, and I maybe I'll show it later, where someone was like, Solid isn't the future or something. It was a response to my web component thing. And the person basically, like, their argument was, I will even use web standards when I know they are not the best. And I'm like, I can't even talk about this on stream. Like, I couldn't do with the stream. I was going to first cover it on stream at some point, and then I was like, how do I even argue against this position? Like, from like where I'm standing, that's like literally the stupidest thing you could ever say. You always choose the best for your user. You don't, or anything. How do you choose a solution for the sake of like knowing that it's not the best solution? And he basically said, like, I'm going to die on this hill where if the web standard says it's the best, or since it's the way to do it, I'll do it even if I know that it's not the best way to do things. It's like there's no conversation to be had there, right? Like that doesn't even make things better. Like if you see something as standard and it's not working as well as it should be, you should be vocal about it. You should talk about trying to guide things in the right way if possible. You shouldn't just stand by it when you know it's not the best thing you'd be doing. Let's just, honestly, it's hard to talk about it. Is just how poor of a position that is. Anyways. Yeah. This happens when people come more about the script principle than user experience. Lit's argument is that because no one else wanted to invest the time to get through the standardization committees, that it's only Lit's opinion that gets into standards. Yeah, I mean that is fair, but it's also because it wasn't even remotely like the React did a reset on our thinking on the web, and it was like, don't get me wrong, there's the downsides to it and there's trade-offs in the React implementation and the Alex Russells of the world and the performance and all that. But you guys, like, the web is much larger than React, granted. But for that aspect, those people building those kind of applications, React is like, if you're trying to be like, look, web components are those solutions versus React, it's not even a battle. React slaughtered it. You know, I'm not necessarily going to be the biggest React fan. I like other frameworks, other approaches, but come on, web components, really? Like, it's not even close. And you can't even make that argument with a serious face. So don't get me wrong. There are ways to leverage web components. They have their uses. There's things that can be done. There's ways but like trying to just like straight up do it, like say like this is a direct competitor, that these components are the same as the other components, like head to head, it doesn't work. So like we kind of got at this really awkward place. I think there's been a lot of effort, especially on the standard side, to reconcile that gap over the last couple of years. I have a much better relationship with the people and work on the standards now than I probably would have in the past, and much better than, say, Pete Hunt and the React team came in, because they felt almost like attacked by this. But the truth is, the React guys were right. I'm sorry, if you guys have to like settle it in. They were right. You were wrong. Like, sink in. I'm not saying this as some like mega React fan. Just understand this. You guys might have reasons for what you did and the bigger picture and all this stuff, but within the scope of the thing being talked about, React was right. So figure out how to regroup and reconcile and move forward from there. And I think the current group of people working on the stuff definitely has. But historically, this has not always been the case. Okay, anyways, let's continue going on. He's got a KVO thing. I want to see what he's doing here.
We have a stock view model, which is our model that we're creating. Remember, we referenced the price and we referenced shares. So those are two observables. The price we have in this example just randomly varying, and the number of shares is initialized to 0. And then the cost is a computed property, just like in our previous example, except in this case, we don't have to explicitly list off what our dependencies are with that dot property syntax. We just call them as functions and the system figures it out.
Sweet.
So if we wanted to make this a little bit more flexible, and we want to either buy a certain number of shares or total dollar amount of shares, things get pretty crazy. So this field is changing all the time. It becomes very difficult for me to like insert something.
Okay.
Because I lose
Where's the
cursor
code?
position and it's resets my input sometimes, and that's because
Okay. Do you guys see what the problem is? Look, does he actually show in the code? How is he writing to the freaking cost? Oh, because he didn't show the template. He put computeds shouldn't be writable except under special cases.
we just call them as functions and the system figures it out.
Yeah.
We
Okay.
want to either buy a certain number of shares. It's changing all the time. Input sometimes, and that's because we have to make a change to our computed property.
Okay. So he made a writable computed. Ugh. Writable compute. It's funny. I actually kind of agree with him on this point in terms of this is not how you solve the problem. This is how you did used to solve this problem with Knockout back in the day. But essentially, what he's doing is he's causing this kind of bouncing behavior.
Property, because the price and the amount of shares that the user is entering are fighting over what is the canonical source of truth for this value. So you have to add some of that crap. I don't even know what it does, but like that's what you have to do. Anyway, on to Angular.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and then he just kind of passed by it. It's too bad, right? It's funny because in Solid 2.0 I've been working on some like writable computer things, but they don't resemble that. And funny thing is I think Vue still has that form of writable computed. I think the key characteristic that you have to do when creating a writable computed is make it so that the derived state overrides the writable state, and the writable state's ephemeral. In that case, that scenario doesn't really happen. The other thing is he's pointing at the fact that it was push based without actual synchronization effect. Because I kind of wonder what that example looks like in React with hooks. Because yeah, linked signals are more like they are based on the writable work that I was doing, like the newer type of writable, not like the classic ones. There's a slight difference in their semantics, where the derived signal actually owns the writable signal. So the derived is higher in the hierarchy, where the classic writable computed, it's more like it's more like having effects right to signals. Because like the link signal or the kind of writable computed or writable memo, or actually one of the new base signal APIs in Solid 2.0, the idea is it's more of a derived, like the use case for it is if you wanted to synchronize something with props, it's ephemeral. So if props come down and you go, I want to create something writable so I can update within my component, the count, but I want it to update when the props count comes in too, and have that override it. That is the case for writable, not to have something fight for the source of truth, but to basically project an ephemeral state on top of a derived state, so that you can start as the derived state, temporarily ephemerally write over it, and then when you actually push the update up the tree and then it comes back down again, you basically replace the ephemeral state with the drive state and start over. That's like a reset. It's very useful for doing forms basically. But if you notice in that zone, it's actually